The nepotism will continue until morale improves. Today, I have another Ranger on the show, a friend of mine, a man who's given me counsel in times of difficulty, and a person who continues to be an encouragement as we go through our lives and our culture. So, Tim, we met tragically at SHOT Show a long time ago, but I am not going to introduce you for me. Go ahead.
Hey, what's going on, buddy? My name is Tim Selbrede. I'm with Maxim Defense, where Coop and I met at SHOT Show 2 years ago, I want to say now.
Yeah.
Recognized that beard and that long, beautiful hair the second you turned the corner at my booth. I was like, I know that guy from somewhere, right? And yeah, we just kind of been hanging out ever since. I used to be in 2nd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment as a medic in Delta Company, one of the first medics for the regiment there. Did a couple deployments with 275 to Iraq and Afghanistan each, and then made a trip to Ukraine semi-recently to East Ohio. And then I spent a lot of time with the U.S. Forest Service on a couple different hotshot crews, a couple different engine modules, and yeah, just kind of jack of all trades, master of none of it.
Tim, the way that you describe your background is something that I think many of us find consistent. Where it's like you've got a number of key events that took place, but then there's so much more. Like I wish I wish I could say there was a very easy way of describing how everyone gets to where they are, but honestly, it's very uncommon for it to be a straight road. I remember hearing my grandfather talk about how he my he served in World War II on a boat, came home, then became an electrical engineer and like worked for the same company for 30 years or 20 years or
Yeah.
whatever. And he just kind of he worked there for a long period of time, and then he left that one and took on another position for a long period of time, and that was it. And it's like, man, all of us in our generation, our veterans are like, yep, so like I got out and then I was a
Yeah.
barista for 6 months, and then I got a degree, and then I was working in like an EMT for a bit, and then I was like then I did security for the Kardashians, and then it's just
One of
like
my first jobs out of Ranger Battalion was working in a grocery store in Tacoma. Tacoma boys, man, getting all the
eh,
limes and the sweet potatoes up there every night.
I did not do the grocery store yet. Maybe I need to knock that off my bucket list. In 2020, one thing that got knocked off my bucket list was I got to CQB with a Mark 18 suppressed and a plate carrier nods in Minnesota, which was an unexpected experience. But this was
Yeah.
the summer of love. Everything was great. There was just
Mostly peaceful summers of love.
there was
Mostly peaceful precinct destructions.
Yeah, there was a situation where we were hired to look after the staff at this one location, and there was a very credible and aggressive threat that was potential, and then there was a concern that somebody had gotten into the building and was doing something badly. Turned out he was stealing crab legs. It wasn't fun at all. So, but I mean, it's it's a big nothing burger, but at least I got to say I was there, and it was like I remember finishing that up, and it was like, oh, never thought I'd do that. But hey, so let's do the quick interim before we get started. For those who are joining the show and listening to us, this is the Redacted Culture Cast. This podcast and production is brought to you for the sake of bringing a bit more of that intellectual argument back to gun culture. As we have seen a generational shift take place in our community, we've seen so many of us look for something a little bit deeper than just saying the Second Amendment. We might believe in these things, we might believe in our rights, but if you've been listening for a while, you know that we like to dig into the foundations of those rights. So it's not just good enough to know that the rule is there to keep us safe, if that's even what it does anymore. What seems to be more important for us to go forward and carry on is to understand the philosophy that undergirds our values and what we believe to be right and true and good. If you want to support the show, you can head over to redactedllc.com. If you're watching on YouTube right now, we thank you because we just got monetized. Let's hope that YouTube does not get aggressive and decide to hate us for our goodness, if that's what it is. But you see on the screen right now, we've got our shop listed, including our surprised friend teleportation hats. If you get the joke, good for you. These are made to order out of a soft, breathable material, a velvet for you fancy peoples, for all your LARPing / detainee adventures. But if you want to jump on and pick up one of those, I made them exclusively because I wanted a Guccier version of a detainee hood, so that if I'm going to do any sort of filming and video or demonstration, it not only does it work as a tool, but it's actually more comfortable for the guest.
Make
For the for
make you great again.
it's got to be, yeah, right. It's got to be comfortable for the audience or for the other actor, whether they're willing participants or not. So back to the show. Tim, so one of the big subjects that's going on. Let's start with kind of some contemporary events. One of the big talking points, if you'd say, and things that you and I have had conversations about, is this idea of like sleeper cells and domestic terrorism, and this like growing. I don't even know if it's growing concern, but like it's like it really reminds me of like a CD on skip, where it's like you think the song's gonna get somewhere, and then it just kind of skips back to where you were 30 seconds ago, and it's just this whole domestic terrorism, politicians bobbling their ugly heads about, oh, I'm afraid about something for once. And now you and I have had some experience on the sharp end of the stick, but also a little bit more on the clandestine side. And what's your take on this whole sleeper cell activated terrorism debacle that's being, I don't even know if it's safe. It's like it's not really the forefront because everybody's still yelling at each other over over Palestine and Israel, but that seems to be the inserted urgency to bring it home. What's your take on that, real quick?
Well, I think first of all, I agree with a lot of what you said on your recent podcast about the sleeper cell stuff, and we can kind of circle back some of those talking points. But the I'll be honest, the what happened on October 7th with Hamas in Israel, that actually surprised the shit out of me too. Especially as the information started to flow in more and more about the severity of it, the complexity of it, and the planning and execution. I mean, logistics alone, that was a pretty spectacular achievement that they did. I'm not trying to say what they did was good. Obviously, I don't even know why I even should have to say that, but here we are. Um, the execution of that is kind of parallel to 9/11. One of the bigger talking points that came after the 9/11 in the report is like, how did we not see this coming? And it's the lack of imagination, right? Like you don't have to be. We have to be right every time. They have to be right once, right? You know, in order to achieve the showmanship that associates with terrorism. But the sleeper cell stuff in the states. Where I might bifurcate on an opinion on where yours is at, I actually do think there is a credible threat to Islamists in the States, not just the States, but especially Europe. I mean, people forget about the attack at the Bataclan movie theater in November 2015 with the Eagles of Death Metal concert in Paris. And it wasn't just the only place they attacked. That was a multi-cell SIMO attack, moving. They had like static, attackers, and they had mobile attackers, and so it was a very complex thing. And that was not even their first attack that they had. I think that was after the Charlie Hebdo thing, even.
Yeah, that was.
So
I think that was after the Charlie Hebdo thing.
yeah. Now, do I think that we need to revert back to some like lizard brain fear after 9/11 where everybody gets mistaken as the Muslim, even the Sikhs? No, I really hope I hope we learned a lot of that lesson after 9/11, not to lump people into groups. However, I do think there is a credible threat. Where it is on that spectrum compared to where I think like domestic leftists or domestic psycho actual white supremacists is, I'm not sure. But Homeland Security just recently had that memo get released to the Border Patrol folks right after I got back from Darcy, um, warning of like Hamas folks making their way through the borders. I actually do think there's something to that. I don't think that, given the ultra political sensitivity that this administration has been to calling a spade, for them to, even if it is Hamas related, for them to actually put a memo out and say to hell with the optics of this, we actually do have something going on. I think that actually does speak a little bit more to its credibility than not.
So the fact that this isn't business as usual, it's just another memo on how Catholic churchgoers need to be investigated for their private racism or whatever it is today. It's that they're willing to actually come out and change the kind of the fabric of the threat, or not the fabric, but the description of the threat is enough for you to go, okay, so there might be something more credible than just politics as usual.
I think so. I mean, it's possible. I'm not a cop. I have never been a law enforcement officer, so I'm not as read on to this stuff as obviously even like the mailman might be in some of these agencies. But you know, without anybody getting in trouble and saying things they're not allowed to say outside of work, that we people do obviously share threat information with each other. There's a law enforcement and contractor network of people that do want to let people know. Like I mean, I saw that memo before it started to make its rounds on social media, and I got it from federal law enforcement officers. Like, hey, check it out. We just got this, no shit, 30 hours after graduating from Darcy.
Yeah.
And I think it's, again, working for the Forest Service for a long time. It's obviously not law enforcement, but it is federal service. You do see the moods change. I worked for Bush, I worked for Obama, and I worked very briefly for the Trump administration for the Forest Service. So you do see the politics start to play at the very high level, sort of trickle down to a degree.
Mm-hmm.
But if they're going to sit there and just cut the bullshit and put a threat memo out like that, I tend to think that it's a little bit more serious because now
Okay.
it's bringing attention to that border is open and it is an actual soft target now.
Gotcha. Yeah. So you can't take when you're talking about it in the sense that we pass information amongst each other. We have our little networks in our communities. I laugh at it a little bit. You can't really, what is it? How's the joke go? Like, I got a dog in me. Like, you can't take the dog out of the man. You can't really take this whole. You've been in the military. You've been concerned about threat memos. You've learned about these kind of you've learned a little bit about it, maybe even you haven't learned about it, but by just osmosis you've absorbed some of the ways that that community looks at threat levels and levels of awareness or whatever the word is of the day. I'm not really going for like a Jeff Cooper red, white, yellow, black or whatever it is. I'm going for something more like how the military will be like, hey, if we're willing to put out this memo, it's actually worth considering. And then we're
Yeah.
going to talk to each other. Like, we're going to talk to each other whether or not we're in the same state, whether we're in the same city or not. We're just going to reach out and be like, hey, have you heard about this? Have you heard anything about this? And we're all going to talk to each other. And that's a good thing. Like, that's actually a really strong component of, I think, the gun culture. I tend to be an optimist with who we are as a community, but
Sure.
and this is one example of why I think that way is that,
Yeah.
when things happen, people actually start to get out, they get over themselves, occasionally, but generally speaking, when there's actually something that is of concern, that is above the normal boiling point of politics, a lot of this culture reaches out, and they don't do it as publicly because we have to have some form of OPSEC, I guess. But we figure out what's going on and like, hey, what
Well,
have you heard
terrorism
here?
in
What
of
have you?
itself in nature is political.
Mm-hmm.
Terrorism is it's showmanship. It's both an overt and a covert act. It's a subjective thing to define, and it's difficult to define, and it's an objective act that we can all go, that's terroristic shit, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a political decision to name things terroristic acts because it starts the processes of funds and laws starting to come into play and the availability of agencies to do different things and cooperate with one another. But it also shouldn't be like with Obama and Nadal Hassan. It shouldn't have been that difficult to call a spade a spade. That would be an instance of like an act of terrorism having politically negative influence on it. It's like why don't we name all the Mexican drug cartels terrorist organizations? Well, there's some if you do that. There's we can get into it later, but there's tertiary effects with Mexican economic trade. Mexico itself would have some negative effects to it if we were to start labeling militant terrorist organizations active within their borders.
Mm-hmm.
So
So let's dig in a little bit to the use of the word terrorism, and you started providing some definitions and some examples, or at least some right and left limitations or guardrails per se on what we would consider it. It reminds me, and I brought this up. I bring this up kind of often, but it continues to be an important point. Whenever you're dealing with an insurgency, the vital component of the count of a counterinsurgency, a vital role and responsibility of a counterinsurgency is to be able to separate the sheep from the goats, right? So you need to be able to separate the bad actors and those who are willingly and voluntarily participating in some form of insurgency activity from the people that they're dragging along or using as human shields. In the case of Hamas, it's actually, as it's been made aware to the world, is that they're willing to use a public as a physical human shield as well as a political human shield in order to continue their intent of killing people on the basis of their ethnicity. And then and so there's that aspect of it, but then there are other forms of, I think, insurgency where you see there are other forms of insurgency where you see people, and this is going to go back to Minneapolis 2020 2021, is that there were people who would enter into, but they were protected not so much by their anonymity but by their political position, who would motivate people to go participate in what we let's just casually refer to as bad behavior. And it's important to distinguish between those two people for the case of counterinsurgency, because it's not like you're cutting the head off the snake. You're literally chopping off all of the you're cutting off the, what is it, I think it's in the War of the Flea. Robert Tabor talks about the fuel of guerrilla warfare is belief in the revolution, and that's an important component. And I think, and he's writing in before a hard distinction between insurgency and guerrilla warfare is made. But the what you're seeing here is the motivation of insurgency is to foment a spirit of rebellion amongst a population, somewhat artificially, through manipulated displays of victimhood and the manipulated displays of the government or police or force, the opposing forces capability. They want to make them look impotent. And so
The show.
and it's a show, right? So like there is a bit of, as you said earlier, showmanship. And so now we're using three words: guerrilla, which is probably going to be the least used in this conversation, but the other two are terrorism and insurgency. Do you have a How would you distinguish between those two, or is there what are useful tools you use for, like, how are those words used in your environment?
I think there's a couple things to kind of dissect that you covered. You brought up an example of people that have terrorism means to an end that are ethnically based. We in Iraq and Afghanistan, we saw a lot of religious-based terrorism, but there was always an ethnic level to it that people in the West don't seem to appreciate, especially in like Iraq with the different tribes, and then especially in Afghanistan, especially with the different tribes and different languages there. That yes, they had Islam as like a unifying, um, uh, they had a unifying identity, Islam, whether it be Shia or Sunnism, um, against the Western infidel in their invading lands. But they also then themselves had their own gangster ass, means to an end. It's like anyone that's been in Afghanistan knows the Haqqani network, but Americans think we were fighting Al Qaeda the entire time and Taliban the entire time in Afghanistan. We were fighting mostly organized crime. So then you have that as an example. You have people that are like cartels. You have the monetary means that drive them for terrorism. You have the political means with the BLM and the Antifa folks, and let's just call them what they are. They are left-wing terrorism cells in the United States. Whether or not they're all of them are Marxists can be dissected later, but yeah, they have a political ideology that transcends, in their case, many of them by race. So like you'll find everybody of every color of the rainbow involved in some of these leftist organizations, where some right-wing ones that are more ethno-oriented, whether they're Black ethno-oriented, Hispanic ethno-oriented, or Atlantic ethno or Northern European ethno-oriented, those can tend to be a little bit more right-wing than they are left-wing. So yeah, every terrorist cell, every um, nefarious acting group's going to have its motivating factors, and you can have some of them that have competing interests. Some of them have 70% of their interests in line with one another. But then, you know,
Yeah,
when you
I
get into
think
more sectarian fighting,
I think a useful historical example. There's two useful historical examples for describing the interwarfare that took place in Afghanistan. I did a tour to Iraq. It was pretty short and uneventful, but I spent many months and years actually in Afghanistan. Going so far as to like learn Pashtun, right? It was a good time. But and when you brought up the Haqqani network, it was like, man, I have not heard that name in a long time. But yes, that's exactly what we're dealing with. And so this example is, um, I think to say that Americans are loosely familiar with the wars of religion that took place between the Reformation and the Revolution in France, or the Reformation and the Revolution in America, is probably a stretch. I remember I was in college, and I encountered a fellow student who honestly believed that Washington and Lincoln were friends, like neighbors. It's like they were separated by almost 100 years. But hey, let you do you, right? Um,
2 years into it, I guarantee you half these idiots with profile pictures of the Ukrainian flag in their bio can't actually find Ukraine on the map, and it's been 2 years, and they
yeah, but
look like us.
I'm sorry, I'm getting us derailed because but that's kind of normal. That I wish I could say that that's an unusual thing. I think
Sure,
we just see it a lot more, and we also see
sure,
it a lot more because you're a lot like we now have a tool called the internet and social media, which puts that on display.
the pacifier, but yeah.
Yeah, 50 years ago, those people would still like they wouldn't be as motivated about, say, Ukraine, because they wouldn't even know it existed. But it doesn't even matter because now they're just another. The only thing that's changed is not their intellectual capacity or their participation in the world. It's just that now they're easier to identify. So use that as you may. But the two historical examples that I wanted to use were like the wars of religion in Europe, where you had this Catholic Protestant, and you had multiple sectarian divisions between them, and that were incorporated into the highest seats of government and the lowest dregs of society, where there were these sort of open, unlimited warfare, decades, if not centuries, where people were fighting against each other, even though they all supposedly were Christian. And
Mm-hmm.
and how are we so foolish to think that that couldn't happen again?
Well,
And then
100%.
but it did in the 1900s. You had communists, socialists, and fascists who all had basically a unifying worldview, which placed government as some form of god, or government as the utopia, the bringer of utopia, that which is a fundamental metaphysical worldview. They all fought and killed the hell out of each other. Communists are notorious for going to war against slightly less or more communist groups.
Oh,
So,
Spain in the Spanish Civil War in the 1930s, Orwell, he fought, spoiler everybody, he fought for the socialists.
yep.
And then he got shot in the throat, and then, he made a comment, and I'm gonna totally screw up his quote, but he basically talks about, he read about battles that never happened, and things, and people that never existed, and there's just the propaganda of it all. And that was a problem for the people on the Republican side of the Spanish Civil Wars. They couldn't unify. You had the popular front motivating factor. You had the international brigades, which had a lot of Americans fighting for them, by the way,
Mm-hmm.
with competitive interests. And then you had the fascist Franco Catholics on the traditionalist side, and identity,
Mm-hmm.
church. So
Yeah. we actually never got to rub shoulders in Ukraine, but we were over there at the same time. And so one thing that we saw during the early days of the Russian-Ukrainian war was just an explosion of propaganda. You had
Oh
this,
yeah.
you had Snake Island, the Ghost of Kiev, and there's just this like one after another of these sort of larger than life stories that were just within the realm of reality that didn't turn out to be real. And then, and I think, let me hear your take on this, but propaganda is a word that's used quite frequently, and it's used quite
Mm-hmm.
frequently as like a descriptor. Oh, that's just propaganda.
Pejorative. Yeah, it's pejorative.
But there's a difference between, or what I think propaganda has done. The idea of propaganda has become in the world of the internet is sort of a collection bin for gray area information that is most likely, if not clearly politically motivated, but the question that factuality of it isn't questioned. So
Mm-hmm.
if I'm questioning its whether it actually is real or true, then I put it in my propaganda bin. And that's and this is all in a descriptive sense. Like I'm trying to figure out how I describe propaganda, but the application of propaganda, the application, the use of propaganda has also changed, because in the old world, by our stories and the way that we talk about it, all you had to do was say the lie or distribute the lie or distribute the propaganda, and that was it. Now propagandists have a much more difficult task, where they have to try to, I'm guessing they have to gauge the sort of the life, what's the word, they have to gauge the half-life, or they have to gauge the life, the
Of
survivability
the
of the
story, yeah.
propaganda, so long as and because all it needs to do is make its effect before it expires.
Sure.
So,
100%.
so it doesn't mean that there isn't propaganda. It just means that it has to be more of a turn and burn mentality. I'm going to put this out. I'm going to have it, I'm going to make sure I'm going to put this out in a certain way. I'm going to seed it with my ideologically supportive components within various media organizations, big and small. And then I'm going to propagate the buzzwords and the keywords, and then people are gonna, and then they're gonna talk about it, and then it's gonna eventually fizzle out and be found out to be not real. But
Mm-hmm.
by then, I've already got another lie in the hopper, and it's like being on a support by fire line. You can't just go cyclic for the whole fight. You got to be like
Yeah.
you got to talk your gun. So MSNBC will put this out, and then the next, who's on propaganda duty today? It's me. It's over here, and then it's like the Young Turks, or it's going to be a Fox News thing, or whatever. So
Those Constantine brothers or whatever. Yeah.
the Krasensteins. I mean,
Yeah. They're not even worth knowing their name properly, you bastards.
I
Yeah.
yeah, when Twitter monetized, when Twitter opened up monetization, um because I would interact with them every once in a while, but once Twitter opened up monetization, um like I respect the hustle, but all they're doing is engagement
With
farming.
click merchants. Yeah. Click merchants.
It's engagement farming.
Yeah.
Like when you read their commentary, it's just divisive enough that it's gonna get your attention and make you want to respond to it, but there's no substance there.
And that's what makes propaganda actually dangerous, is when people can actually make money on it that aren't involved in the actual game. So to talk on the propaganda thing, um yeah, so like the Ukrainians, let's kind of like start in one spot and kind of jump around. We got to Ukraine, I want to say probably on day 4 or 5
Yeah.
of the actual invasion, and we got to Lviv late at night, kind of got ourselves settled, and then it was probably the next morning we were driving through Lviv and some of the suburbs, and there were already Ghost of Kiev posters, um, Snake Island posters, the sunflower grandma, make sure you die with sunflowers in your pocket, sunflower seeds lady. Let's see. David and Goliath was a big one, the Ukraine being obviously David. And it was seriously like day 4, 5, 6 that they had that shit everywhere. And we kind of laughed about it, like, holy shit, they're already Not that we thought there was anything to it other than like just fast working people. I mean, we don't think they had those stories ready in advance 2 weeks earlier before anyone starts to read into it. But yeah, we saw the Ghost of Kiev and the Russian warship fuck off, all this other stuff, and um, I think in many ways it has a positive means to an end. Propaganda, for what it's worth, depending on who's using it and to what goal, uh, it could be a good thing. And look, all of us here probably joined Ranger Battalion because of the propaganda that worked on us. Nothing against it. Hey, I love Black Hawk Down too, but we make war movies right when we need fucking recruits, just like every other major country does, and Russia and China and everybody else. We just tend to have a little bit more ethics with what we do with our people. At least we think we do, and we try to. But if we go to like look at propaganda and its effectiveness, Goebbels, look at Goebbels in World War II. He and the rest of the Nazis, and not just the Nazis, by the way, the Jews were targeted by communists, also had Jews in them too. So it was kind of a weird self-defeating monster that one was. But the reason why propaganda works is because it's a lot of times it's based in some truth, right? At least it has to be, or at least perceived truth. The Jews, of course, it goes without saying, deserve nothing that happened to them in World War II and the Holocaust. But how was it easy to make them a scapegoat? Well, a lot of the Jews in Europe had the ability to trade and do commerce across German borders and across other European borders, while the average German was watching all of Germany get sold out underneath him for pennies on the dollar, and he didn't have a pot to piss in, and the Deutschmark went through the fucking roof, and they had the trans stuff going on, and the average German was like, "What the hell?" And it happened so fast, and so the Germans, the nefarious Nazis, they tapped into that very real and understandable strife, which as Americans, we need to be really careful about, that we are just as susceptible as some very well-mannered, nice man in Bavaria that never had a problem with Jews, but watched everything around him burn. And you know what? When you start losing when you start seeing your daughters whoring themselves off to pay for bread and soup for your family, or your wife selling everything in your house to pay for bread and soup, or you lose kids to diseases that only 6 years ago would have been no big deal in your communities, people have with dangerous messages, they can land. In the United States, people on the right, they need to be aware that we can be absolutely hooked into that shit too. So, but you also have the positive use of propaganda that Americans used in World War II, like, did John Basilone do everything that his Medal of Honor citation says? Yeah, I want to believe so. And I honestly have no reason not to doubt that John Basilone did everything that they said he did. But the way that we made, John Basilone baseball cards and comic book strips, and not just on John Basilone, but any one of these major American war fighters, to sell war bonds and get guys to recruit, because we had such an existential fight on our hands. Propaganda, depending on its usage and who's wielding it, can have a good or negative effect, right, on its people. So, I mean, look what's
Yeah,
happening in Armenia and Azerbaijan with Nagorno-Karabakh over the last 5 6 years, with all that war fighting they've been having on. That they dehumanize one another in different parts of the world way better than people in the West, I think, are aware of it. Especially old blood
y-
feuds.
yeah. Well, one of the things that I remember going in our experiencing in Ukraine is we were talking. I was actually talking to kind of a theologian or a church member in Ukraine, and we were talking about just the idea of the church. And at some point in time, the schism between the Catholic and the Orthodox Church was brought up, and they talked about it like it was yesterday. And for us,
Hmm.
for me, being a Protestant or something like a Protestant in the West, um, the and having an education, like I went to school for this stuff. I got a degree in theology with and a component of it was church history. And
Hmm.
so my understanding of the schism that took place almost, or 17ish hundred years ago, um I mean, once after a millennia, the line gets a little blurry, but It took place a
Yeah.
long time ago. I'm pretty sure it happened in like a 300s AD, but I might be mistaken.
Depends which schism. I think the one that we're thinking about, and I'm a Catholic for everybody listening here, and I'm
The
gonna
big
totally
schism between your boys and
yeah.
the
I can't remember the date. 1560, something like that.
no, the big schism was between
Um,
was in like the 300-400s between the
yeah.
Catholic and the Orthodox or
Yeah.
Orthodoxy.
I'm
It
thinking of the
was the
Lutherans.
no, that was the Reformation, and so that's why we're supposed to hate each other.
Silly Lutherans. Yeah.
Well,
Or
I'm not.
that's no. I say it's funny because like we were talking about old blood feuds and how the people in that part of the world talk about shit, and it just happened yesterday. Look at the propaganda that's been used with Olga of Kiev, right?
Hmm.
Saint Javelin, the Javelin people online. They
Hmm.
take that gal with the javelin that looks all stoic and angry. Her
Hmm.
story's badass, man. She was a
Hmm.
bad mother. And then 200 years after her bones had long dried out, Genghis Khan's grandkid came over and knocked over her tomb and burned everything in sight. Like that's how insane that one big thing for me in that part of the world was just how old that history was. And for some reason,
Yeah.
it hit in Ukraine harder than it did in Afghanistan for me. And I don't know why.
Yeah, I think it was I was driving through across Poland, getting ready to. I was driving across Poland, and that was the first time in my life that I thought of getting that really shitty Crusader haircut, where like you just shave the back of your head. It did not fall through. I did
I
not. I
was
did not.
looking for a tracksuit.
Yeah, I know. I have a story about trying to get a tracksuit, which had more of a tragic ending than a good one, but that's for another time. So I think I don't want to necessarily move on directly from
Sure.
propaganda.
Well, I think all ties them, but yeah,
I don't want to move directly from propaganda. I want to be able to transition it because we've talked a little bit about like terrorism and how I want to be careful because what I mean be careful, I mean be articulate. It goes back to what we talked about earlier is that I remember like it's just in recent history or every time something like this happens, you see a plethora of unserious peoples. One of the things that I experienced or that I observed bringing a camera and looking at in Ukraine when you had so many like different nationalities coming to that country to go support in one way or another was this like echoing haunting phrase, and that was, we are an unserious peoples.
hmm
We are an unserious peoples. And you saw that in the way that um by no for no lack of like no one will say that these people didn't have fervor and energy, but the this is a bit of a caricature, but a caricature that I saw multiple times, so much that I started becoming suspicious that it was manufactured. Was you had some guy who flew over to Ukraine with his own dime, who brought his own plate carrier and equipment or whatever, and he was going to go fight on behalf of the Ukrainians against the Russians. And this naivety that was driving him was beyond. It was actually beyond naivety. It was something else, something a little bit more. I would
hubris.
say hubris is a word we could use, but it was that these people that I would encounter is like they would go over and you could almost see that their idea of what they were about to encounter was that they were going to enter into Ukraine hailed as a hero, and then some dude or some hot Ukrainian chick was going to give them a set of quad nods and a suppressed AK-74 and say, we're going to integrate you into the special forces and you're going to go fight the Russians. And it's like,
Couldn't
no,
do it
this
without you, man. Yeah.
no, it's trench warfare, man. They're looking at
Yeah,
logistics.
I have a HLZ in my backyard just in case the colonel comes and lands the helicopter to pick me up. Like, hey, we can't do the mish without you. Yeah, I live in that la la land, dude.
Tim, I'm gonna hurt you right now. You're gonna have to, but it's because I'm a friend. I get to do this. You don't have the '80s haircut, so there's no reason to have it.
I don't
There
have
needs
the hair to have a cut.
there is a certain amount of flow to wind volume where your hair is moving in the wind, but not as much as it would in a helicopter, because that's just like, Johnny, our cartoon level straight blindedness. But
Yeah.
you don't got it. So if you don't have the hair, no one's coming.
Damn
Uh, the good news is I don't have an LZ in my background, so no one's going to be asking me either. So I'm just
it.
a
Right.
guy with a podcast. But yeah, so like there was this kind of naivety that came from a lot of Westerners, and there was different formats that where that naivety came about, like going over and using your cell phone and taking up to date photos of where you're at and breaking basic OPSEC to YouTube or live stream how cool you are or whatever you're doing. Like we all know the hyperbole of it, but the part of it that was kind of astounding was even from people who had a modicum of military experience. It's like you're not coming over here. People who are coming over there, you're not entering into an environment where you have air superiority and distinct supply lines. You're talking about people who are like, yeah, I need to. And you show up there and you think they're going to give you a gun, and it's like, dude, that gun has been rusting for 20 years. They don't know what to do with it. They don't know what to do with you. They don't even know if you're like they're conscripting illiterate farmers to go fight the Russians. Yeah, sure, you might be slightly better than that, but you're not going to be integrated in the halls of Special Operation Ukraine 101.
Yeah.
So it was a bit of it was a bit of an eye-opening, maybe not eye-opening, but reminding experience of how when we talk about things like propaganda and we talk about things like terrorism and we talk about these terms that we use, now is the time for us to do a lot of that hard work of understanding terminology and developing ourselves and our thinking and our ethical formats and our frameworks, and even whether it's books that we read, conversations that we have, or ways that we look at things like terrorism. The solution to propaganda is not being a free thinker. People use that word all the time. Oh, I'm a free thinker. I don't do it. I don't just consume what I'm told. The short answer is bull fucking shit.
Bullshit. Yeah,
The
bullshit.
the long answer is where is your foundation? Like how do you come to term where's the foundation of truth? Where do you dig into this information? How do you understand it? Like what are you trying to say? Because just being skeptical does not a wise man make you. So
Hmm.
let's talk about terrorism then. Define terrorism if you can.
Yeah, that's kind of a funny way to frame that question. I recently was fortunate to attend the Law Enforcement Counterterrorism Course Level 1 at DARC, the Direct Action Resource Center outside of Little Rock, Arkansas. And before you even get into kit and start getting scuffed up in the shoot house, we have that conversation. And it is one of the questions that Rich asked, what is terrorism, right? And then, which would kind of seem like an easy answer. You get kind of everybody hangs it up for a second, thinks about it. One man's terrorist, another man's freedom fighter, or another one's, you know, you know, crusader for rights. Terrorism really is a political act um, meant to change policy, doctrine, or plans of a government. Really, um, it can be either ethnically based, it can be um, commercially based terrorism in the sense of like organized crime units blowing up one another's operations or the government operations in order to make their monies still flow. It could be religious terrorism, like what we see with like Islamists, like what you see primarily with Islamists is unfortunate for the Muslims that try to live a normal life. But and then now we're seeing more eco-terrorism kind of rearing a new head. With people in the Pacific Northwest, Europe. We got people that we still don't know who attacked that power plant outside of Fort Bragg and shut down the power out of there for a month. So yeah, terrorism really, in order for it to really have a terroristic effect, it needs to have that show. It needs to have that panache, really. Like, it isn't always about the kill count. It isn't always about the biggest explosion. It's just the idea that you keep people on alert and you use fear and death and terror, not to use the definition in the definition or the word in the definition, but to affect change.
Mm. I think a necessary component to it, I think a necessary but not sufficient component for terrorism is the showmanship of it. And I know we
Yeah.
were barely we stopped ourselves before we started talking about this before the show. And a part of the showmanship of terrorism is it's sort of like the opposite of what you'd expect special operations to do. Special operations or like a night raid is supposed to sneak in, do the job, and then leave. And so
Mhm.
the effect is made, but there isn't like a raw display of power. I mean that is actually kind of a tricky thing to say because that's not really what happens. Like at least it does in some cases, but when we did our night raids in Ranger Battalion, for a while we were doing call outs, but even if we were not doing call outs, we were doing soft hits or hard hits. So and for the audience who's listening, the difference between a soft hit and a hard hit, um, generally speaking, is a hard hit is usually very loud explosives. You're starting with explosives and you're going in hard, whereas a soft hit might mean a little bit more of a surreptitious or creeping in entry. And
Mhm.
a soft hit can always escalate very quickly to a hard follow up. But the primary goal of a soft hit would be to enter or enter or secure the target building unannounced, unawares. Whereas a hard hit will have a little bit more. It's going to favor aggression over stealth. Um, and I mean, like comically enough, we like this is also how video games play out. Like you sneak around until you can't, and then you fight, and then you fight your way out, and then
Yeah.
you live. If you want to, I that's for another time. So but whereas terrorism is sort of the opposite, where they want visibility, but they want to have some control over the visibility. So for the purpose of affecting cultural and political change. All
Yeah, I
right.
mean, if you look at the Munich attack in I think it was the 70s when the PLO sent operatives into Germany into the Olympic Village and took the Israeli team hostage. Some of the Israelis were killed immediately upon the terrorists breaching into their living quarters, and then some of them were killed during the hostage process, and then unfortunately everybody else was killed at the airfield during the failed attempt by I think it's like KSK's predecessors to free the hostages. But I mean, it's they have one of the most iconic and haunting photos ever associated with terrorism in the world, and that is that black and white grainy photo of that masked man coming out on that balcony and looking over the edge there. That's a very iconic photo, and it does still to this day, even as a guy that's fought against terrorists, like I mean, that still that affects me. That photo, you're like, yeah, that's a nasty bastard in that picture, and you know it. You know.
I'm looking it up right now. I don't have a Jamie. I'm seeing if I can. I'm
Yeah,
seeing if
it's
I can. If I can. I'm seeing if I can even pull up the image. Oh yeah, 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 yeah,
yeah, it's
yeah.
a
Right
very
here.
iconic photo that they recreated it in that movie Munich that came out about 10 or so years ago, and they freeze framed that guy in there because it's kind of falls like a Tiananmen Square picture. It's like
It,
immediately what they're referring to when you see it.
it's. Let's see if I can. Let's see if I can actually. Well, let's see. We're gonna do a share screen here. Uh, there you go. Boom. Is it up? There it is. Yeah, it's up.
Yep.
So yeah, this is that kind of famous picture. The dude's got the not. It doesn't even really look like a full balaclava. But yeah, it's a famous. Just for those who are listening and you want to catch it on later, all I ended up really doing was googling, using Google to search for the terms Munich black and white terrorist. So
Yeah.
I mean, it is an iconic image, but it's also I agree with you on the haunting sense. There's a bit of a ghostish nature to it.
And then
So
terrorism,
terrorism.
to be fair, good.
Oh no 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 no! I'm listening now.
Well, we were just talking about the show. So like the target is more sometimes important than the physical death count. Like you can affect change by killing the one right person and getting the right soundbite. Then you can actually, as terrorist organizations, work against your mission if you kill too many people. If like with Russia and the Belsen school massacre when they took all those kids hostages, and that was that's a different kind of that whole incident is a very interesting animal of its own, but that definitely did not work well in the Chechens' favor for sympathy. You know what I mean? When you do something like that versus, the Iranians that took over the embassy in London that the SAS did that Operation Nimrod on, they all died. If not all of them, I think they all got captured or killed. But the fact that they could say to everybody, "Hey, I touched an embassy," or people don't know that there was a time when Mecca, uh, Mecca, the major giant mosque that they go out and do their pilgrimage to once a year at the Hajj. There was an incident in the 70s where like 300 or 400 terrorists took over that and engaged in like a 2 week long siege, and that got the Saudis' attention too. So um, that was a big lightning strike in the Muslim world. The Islamists versus Islam. That kind of woke a lot of Muslims up to this po political Islam terrorism. It's not all
Yeah.
religious, somebody says a political means to an end, like the Baptists.
Yeah. There's a using a loose veneer of religiosity to legitimize
Mhm.
one's position. There's
Sure.
I think I've talked about it quite a bit recently. It's that book Why Young Men by Giovanni, where he talks a little bit about how I think it's Louis Farrakhan, if I remember right, Louis Farrakhan and his organization, the Nation of Islam, will use um, what is that? Okay, we got you again. Use that. I use a worldview. I don't know if I can hear you. Go ahead. Oh no, we're down. Your audio's gone. I'll finish. I'll catch up with where I'm at though. But it's Jamil Javini's conversation on or his talk about how this organization, these people will represent sort of a religious position. And the thing about religions is they're a worldview. They're an idea of how the world structures, and what people like to think is that they don't have one. But the reality is, no, we don't got you, Tim. We're gonna have to do the refresh thing. So if you want to do that, jump out and jump back in. We'll catch you in a second here, and I'll just go through what I'm covering on this subject because in his book Why Young Men by Jamil Giovanni, he talks about how young men who are not connected to their communities and they don't seem invested in something, they don't have they feel like they're separated from their environment. Maybe they're the children of refugees, or they exist within a worldview or in a place where they don't have a positive outlook for the future. Although he's not excusing their bad behavior on this scenario and the situation that they're born into, he points out how organizations will use
As
a
we
min. Oh dear, am I back? Are you back? I can hear you now.
Can you hear me?
I gotcha. You
Keep
sound
working.
loud and clear.
Sorry, keep
But
working.
how these organizations will use a veneer of religiosity to claim a sense of legitimacy, where their stated intent and their underground intent, or their overt intent, is to inspire people to engage in forms of terrorism. So, Tim, did you catch it? Did you catch all that?
Oh yeah, did you get me?
Yeah, I got you now. You're back loud and clear. So,
Sweet. Yeah,
yeah.
it's funny that you mentioned that book. I just downloaded it. I need to start getting into it. But you raise a lot of good points, and I mean, just reading the cover of the book, I mean, I can already imagine what I'm going to run into it because, yeah, the most dangerous thing that you can run into is bored, illiterate, unemployed men with nothing to do. Fighting age males. They're easy to spin up. Like people wonder, like, how is it easy to spin up all these guys in these Muslim countries to be fighters? Like, well, dude, first of all, they can't read. Not all of them, but a lot of them can. Enough of them can't, right? Where the only person in the village that can read is the crazy cleric, and that's trying to get spun up. And you need a person to blame for A, B, and C, and you have not learned Western cause and effect, you know, um, just problem solving. And so, okay, village blew up, must be the Americans, like, yeah, because the guy told me it must be Americans. And if I blow myself up, I get, rewarded for it. And so, or if you have people in Mexico, you have these young men in Mexico that are people in America can't just wrap their mind around that kind of poverty that exists within a 2-hour plane ride of them. And these guys have a quick road to success. They see their big cousins rolling around with F-350s and gold-plated guns and a bunch of hyenas and cash all the time. And the cartel's the guy building the roads in my little village, Sinaloa, or the cartel is the guy that fixed the cholera epidemic in Chihuahua's villages, right? And so these guys are like, they're Robin Hood characters to some of these people. And so yeah, young men, it should be of no surprise to some of these folks that this is the target demographic for these bastards. So
Yeah, well, it's also like it's historical.
mm-hmm.
I think there's a positive, or there's a positive warning and a sense of encouragement that can be sent to gun culture, is that as much as gun culture is aware of how isolating and atomizing contemporary Western society is, which is a fundamental building block to that sense of isolation and loneliness and disaffected nature. Gun culture is also aware of it enough to not regularly as a whole be tripped up into the fervor. And a case in point example would be 2020 and the Boogaloo Boys. Is that there was this meme of the Boogaloo, and it was a joke, and most people understood it was a joke. Like, it was funny. It was sort of an inside joke.
It's the gold core of 2020.
Yeah, well, yeah, I don't even Gold Core to me is just funny. Like,
I think it's hilarious.
I'm having a good time with it.
Shout out to the Armory.
Yeah, I think am I their high priest yet? I don't know.
Yeah.
But we'll find out. The point being said is, like, the Boogaloo thing was a big joke, and it was sort of like funny, but it had its side quests and its video game narratives, and it's like it was an inside joke, but then some people took it too far.
Yeah.
And they took it too far, not in like a sort of a shameful, not in a shame. No, it was a shameful way, but it's just like to be clear, this is probably the most insulting way I can say it, but it's kind of like that kid who was way too much into anime and thought he could go Super Saiyan. You're like, dude,
that's perfect, man. Like, that's the best way. Your mom, yeah. You get these guys that were so, no matter what, they're going to be against cops or government, and they're Boogaloo Boys. Dude, could you possibly like practice any nuance into like your position? Nope. I got my stupid shirt on. I got my Condor plate carrier going on. I got my 38% BMI. I'm ready to fucking fight it. You're like, okay.
Yeah, well, yeah. So it was a tragedy, but it's like, it was a tragedy because they didn't have a community around them to be like, how about you not? How about you not do this? Like, let's not do the Boogaloo joke.
Well, anytime you try to big brother them, you're a fed. Oh God, yeah, okay.
Which is actually a double-edged sword, because the whole thing about the whole thing about the whole Fed thing is it is a genuine concern of mine.
Sure.
I'll say it's not. I'm not. I guess, to be even more clear, I am less concerned about myself being infiltrated by a nefarious Fed.
Sure.
Like, and there's a couple reasons for that. If I'm going to do something stupid, it's going to be my idea, because I want, because you know what I mean? Like, one, it's going to be my idea. Okay.
Yeah.
And so for all the Feds in the chat,
fantastic.
Trust me, if you're gonna come to me with if you're gonna try to infiltrate my network to inspire me to do something stupid, I've got a dumber idea right around.
Yeah, I've got one for you.
How about we just steal RPGs from the cartel that's smuggling them in America 35 miles from where I live, and use those as initiate? No. I'm being facetious. Yeah. Something in Minecraft. But the thing that really concerns me is that it goes back to something that we saw in Ukraine. I visited this little village, and we went to church there because it was a Sunday, and it wasn't you weren't with me, but I went to church there. Beautiful place. You could hear them going through the homily, and you could hear the chanting and the singing for miles rolling through this beautiful late winter rural part of Ukraine.
Mhm.
It was up in the Carpathian Mountains, just so picturesque. Like it
Gorgeous.
was it was so beautiful. Like again, you and I both live in America, so our oldest buildings aren't that old
No.
in comparison. But it's like I have nostalgia for a time I never experienced, and that time that I never experienced was like hearing a genuine Gregorian chant in a classic cathedral. Correction being, I have, because I've been there.
Yeah.
I've been to the Basilica in the Vatican, and I've been to Europe, and I was at the Church of Notre Dame before it's burned
For
recently.
the welding accident.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's just they welded Allah Akbar into the side, and then there was a comma, and then they had to burn it down.
Yeah.
I'm being facetious. That's not what happened. I don't know,
I'm
but
not.
the point being said is it was beautiful. And so, but when we encountered the locals there, they did have one person, a girl who was a young gal who was a school teacher, could speak broken English, and we're clearly American. I mean, body stature, stance, clothing, whatever. The first thing they did was call the military on us, and they were like, and everything was suspicious. Like, what?
Yeah.
There was no like. We went to church with them. They let us attend church there, and then they wanted to arrest us.
Yeah.
It's like, oh yeah, this is our
You're a look
this is
right.
our 700-year icon, and it was all like, but there was no like everything was suspicious. Now, given it was a time of war, but that's their attitude was, if I don't know exactly what's going on, it has to be a Russian spy.
Yeah.
And I'm concerned about gun culture, that it will go down that road.
Everything.
The moment I get uncomfortable, it has to be a Fed
Or a psyop. Yeah.
or a psyop, and it's like at some point in time you have to put down the skepticism of everything,
Yeah.
and you have to take up useful intelligence and consider where you're at in the world.
Well, everybody knows that Hawaii was Jewish space lasers, right? There's no way that just a nasty wind event could burn down a city in Hawaii, right? It's got to be some nefarious thing. Yeah, it's exhausting. And I don't know if you watch this guy on YouTube, as I'm gonna probably butcher his channel. It's like What If Alt List. Great kid. I say he's a kid just because he's younger than me. I think he's brilliant. I love his videos. He had one just recently come out about how Christianity like basically saved the world. And but one thing he does talk about in some of his videos is a theme of like trust in societies, and how America is a high trust society. And then there's parts of the world, especially in the Arab world, a lot of the old East, it's very low trust societies, and definitely Ukraine, even before it was a Soviet bloc country, it definitely would fall into that low trust society thing. I mean, yeah, Carpathian Mountains, that's where I got detained in it for a little bit longer than I wanted to be, which is always a fun story. But yeah, outside the fact that you're in a time of war there, yeah, there's a why are you here kind of aspect always to it.
Yeah, that would be my concern for gun culture, is that it adopts that attitude of skepticism in everything, and so we start.
Already a skeptical industry to begin with. It's already a skeptical world. You don't know if that, even before all the Fed post meme stuff, people would always say like, hey, you gotta be careful who's asking about your gun at the range. Even years before this, that was always kind of a thing. Careful the guy that's asking too many questions about your shit.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, the feds don't do themselves any favor, because they do harbor people with ill intent, and it does a damn terrible disservice to the scores of federal officers that are legitimately good people, trying to do the right thing. And 99 times out of 100, dude, if they're bumping you, you've kind of earned the bump, like at least you used to be that. That's exactly what a Fed would say. It's
I don't
insidious, and people were driving themselves crazy with it.
I don't know if the statistic is the useful part, because it's sort of, well, one, it's like, okay, the statistic. Let's just say what percentage, if we were to start with a question of what percentage of bad or politically motivated hits are acceptable within the within a an organization?
Yeah.
And the right answer is we want 0, but
Sure.
that's also not really how it works, because then you're dealing with a problem that you can't really new number, you can't, what's the word, quantify. Jeez, I'm getting all my words wrong. You can't really quantify it, because first of all, who's reporting which hits are legitimate and which hits are illegitimate? And then the second part is who's and how are you defining those things? And like, it's not that those things cannot be understood. It's that I think the issue that people have is that you're having these very public, very aggressive, and actually rather egregious actions being taken by a very few, with no known, no publicized method of recourse, and no consequences for the perpetrators. And a classic example that you and I would have experienced like this in Ranger Battalion is you're on, what was it called when you were the RRC, or the red, not, it wasn't RRC, you were the Ready Company, right?
RF1.
RF1. Yep, you're on RR. It's 2 R's, right? Ranger
RF.
Ready Force 1.
Yeah.
And so Ranger doctrine explanation is that at any point in time, there in the battalions,
You're out.
there is a contingent of Army Rangers in one of the battalions who is capable of leaving the base within
4 hours.
4 hours. Okay, yeah, I don't remember, but
It's not in 4 hours.
it's just you had to be able to leave immediately. And that was in my time, that was in a time of war when all eyes were on trying to find bin Laden. And so if we got the right tick, and it turned out that we were somehow picked for the job, we were expected to be on a plane for whatever that needed to be done. Or maybe let's just say there was a counteroffensive that was huge. Whoever was on RRF1, and it was a rotating roster, whatever group was on RRF1, there were requirements. You weren't allowed to drink alcohol, and you weren't allowed to leave a certain radius of the base. And those were the very basic concepts. Now there were some other stipulations, but we're just going to do those two. So what it would have been like is if you're on your company, your group is not on RRF1, you're on whatever is chill time, and you guys can go to the bar on Friday or whatever you want to. But then you find out that somebody else from a different battalion was on RRF1, and they were found to be inebriated, breaking the rules, and now your battalion on the other side of the country is being punished for it. This is what we're dealing with when we're dealing with, on some sense, with the police force on an issue, right? Isn't this a good way of describing it? It's like, well, I had literally no influence over him.
Oh, the first person that does something stupid and they're wearing dual tube nods and they have level 4 plates, it's going to be, everyone else is going to be affiliated with, night vision culture, body armor culture. Yeah, they're going to start throwing those into the Boogaloo boys and the Proud Boys. Everyone's a Proud Boy, Boogaloo boy, just because one guy. Yeah.
Yeah, well, no, I'm talking about this on the Fed side, on criticisms leveled at the Fed. And what I'm trying to do in this one is I actually kind of find the conversation over, not all Feds are bad.
Okay.
Not all Feds are bad is like, it's a question of, that's not the problem. The problem is we don't have anything to do about it.
Absolutely.
The issue is not that we know that there's bad eggs in the force. The problem is that the bad eggs are politically motivated and protected by partisan politics and characters, or diversity hire, or whatever they're
whatever. To fire feds. It's very, very difficult to lose your job as a federal employee. Period.
Well, I mean, I don't know. Ask Kyle Serafim that. He lost his pretty quick.
Well, I mean, I worked for the Forest Service for a while, and we had a captain that was a violent drug offender that assaulted cops, and it took the marshals and 7 months to get him out of the property.
Yeah, but if he wore a MAGA hat to work one day, they'd have him fired within 12 minutes.
Yeah, for sure. I mean? 100%.
You know what I mean? And that's what I'm saying is, there's it's not just that there's an inequity or inequality of the issue going on here. The problem that people are expressing is that there's no recourse of grievances. So the cop who says, I'm just doing my job while shutting down a church. At the same time, a 10,000 person protest is threatening to burn down a building. The cop who shuts down the church during whatever gets nothing done to him, but the cop who makes a frowny face at an activist at a political rally and someone snaps a photo of it because that's the purpose of the rally, is to make them look bad. That guy loses his job, and he now becomes the representative, or the cop who has to show up at a call where the perpetrator has consumed a lethal amount of fentanyl. Like, what do? You can't do nothing, and you can't do anything. But now he is, and I'm not trying to defend Chauvin because I'm not a legal expert in this sense, but even recently the autopsies are coming out, and there's information. And I guess I'll say this as a Minnesotan. Generally speaking, I think most of us knew what happened there, but it was politically expedient. It was politically expedient, and there was a fervor whipped up, and people should feel shame for being compelled by that fervor.
Well, you've got 3 cops in Tacoma, Washington. One of them, full disclosure, Matt Collins, is one of my oldest friends from my platoon and battalion and one of my groomsmen, and I don't care who knows about it in public. They are also part of that. Let's throw 3 random cops, and their case isn't even nearly as complicated as the Floyd and Chauvin trial was. And not to call that one complicated, but yeah, when you eat a speedball, your heart tends to stop. Especially when the ME says that you didn't put your neck on the guy's neck and causes death. Yeah, you're right. You get cops that are actually not good men, not good servants of the law and their people, that are shutting down churches, that are grabbing parents out of school board meetings and watching Catholic traditional Latin mass congregations. And then you've got cops that are being forced to try to solve impossible math problems in some of these societies. And we talk about Minneapolis, so let's just keep poking at that place. You had, after, like, first of all, George Floyd dying is a tragedy, full stop. It sucks. It's awful. I don't think we have to go any further into that than that, but none of that justified them burning down that precinct, and there was a couple of Darcy graduates on that rooftop managing that evacuation for a while. And
I was in the parking lot with a camera.
Yeah, and you know what, man? The funny thing is, the BLM and Antifa kids, they did an entirely detailed AAR about that incident. It's on CrimeThink. I mean, holy shit, there it is. They had people in certain colors. They talk about where they were positioned in the crowd and their roles and responsibilities, and they try to mimic it in Portland with the yellow shirt moms and all these other motherfuckers with all these different roles lined up specifically in that crowd to do a very coordinated assault. Yeah, no, the cop paradigm, or the paradox. Yeah, I'll tell you this, we're really at the end of the day where I put my hat on all of this. I don't envy those guys.
No,
I really don't. I mean, I have my own personal rivalry with cops as a former outlaw motorcycle club member, and then a firefighter. I have to kind of give them shit. But at the same time, one of my best friends right now, who is probably the cop's cop, who was the Ranger's Ranger, if you can get him, Matt Collins, his trial is ongoing right now. If he can get got for a political hack job, anyone can. And how are you going to sit there and ask for people that you need? Like, I mean, I struggle. I want to be a cop sometimes. Especially, I'm 38, sure. But yeah, you see enough on the sidelines. Everybody wants to get in, and that's when you start getting groups like, and we can talk about this later, but like groups like the Appalachian Ranger Association, where if the people could incorrectly assume they're like the Boogaloo Boys, where they were trying to be more structured, more intentful, and their execution did not go well because of the management there. But it's a false equivalency. And then because you have these Boogaloo idiots, you're going to look at people like they're trying to do organized groups of men for their communities. They'll get lumped into these like potential terror cells. And then, like we talked about, then you just need one bad Fed getting in there, and then you have a Gretchen Whitmer situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, bringing up the ARA as one way of doing it is that there were it seems like the information that's come out recently, and I'm actually I'm deliberately doing like news speak because I have not done a deep dive investigation into the persons and personalities responsible. I
Your
know
folks.
Mark has been on the show. And when he was on, he represented himself well. And whether or not that means he was a charlatan is kind of a challenge that I think we're going to face more in the future. Because one thing you got to recognize, you can't. We are still a decentralized peoples. Like the gun culture is a very decentralized network. And that is good because that's what we want. We don't want a central authority. We don't want, when I jokingly refer to myself as the high priest of gun culture, like it's a joke, man. I know it. And if you think I'm being serious about that, might not be able to help you. But
Yeah. Do you really think I'm going to be America's first Caesar? Like,
no, because you're going to be the second. I'm first. Dibs.
okay.
We know the rules. I mean, you can be the first Caesar, but I'll be the first American emperor. I prefer Napoleon over Rome, but that's just a little. I'm being facetious. But so no, going back to the point, the issue here is the community. People who are in leadership are going to face greater scrutiny. They're just going to do it, right? And there will always be resentful, envious people who will make it their mission to do a political axe job on somebody. They're going to try to ruin their credibility, attack their nature, or attack their character. It's always going to happen. And so so you're faced with a double-edged sword. There's always going to be an axe job, but some of those axe jobs are legitimate. And so the problem is not to look at it as a game of chess where you're thinking, oh well, this guy's moving into leadership and we're going to play the cool French court. If you want to get a motif of the French court, read was it Alexandre Dumas? He wrote the Three Musketeers, right? Read the Three Musketeers, the original one. You get a little bit of this like courtesian method. But it's like it's not exactly like that. It's actually more important for us as a decentralized network to establish meaningful, valuable, and effective methods of evaluating information, especially information that pertains to us. So like, what does that mean? It means that if Mark of the ARA calls me up tomorrow and says that he needs my help to go save Appalachia, probably not going to answer. But if Mark comes out and says, I made a mistake, or I don't care, whatever it is, like, or if it turns out that the accusations are bogus, that's good news for the community.
Sure. Oh, I would.
But
Yeah,
it's,
I don't ever want to see anything burn.
well, yeah, I mean, there has to be a pathway to redemption in another sense. But
Sure.
I think what we're dealing more with on the Fed side, going back a little bit, as I think we can kind of close this segment up, is that the issue that we're having with the whole government, the use of federal law enforcement or the bad apples within law enforcement, is that there seems to be no redress of grievances against politically protected, motivated bad actors. And I think there's actually and to even go back into the propaganda thing, this is a really good example of looking at long form playmaking, because in 2023 we saw a massive surge from the Democratic Party and its constituents supporting the ACAB line. And the role of Black Lives Matter functioned as a bit of an insurgency to break the will of the population in support of their system of governance.
Yes.
Now, America goes through a reformation or a revolution every 4 years because we have a new soft revolution, let's just say, with supposedly with voting, asterisk, check mark. But the point being, yeah, voting should be safe, legal, and rare. But my point being said is, you get this issue where the same people now who ran campaigns and built their sort of their most recent form of government persona on ACAB and defunding the police have now put one of the people who is responsible at the core for this worldview and this political standard as the person who's supposed to be responsible or in charge of standing up police for the sake of executing politically motivated targets through the Office of Gun Violence Prevention. That's what it's called. Kamala Harris funded domestic terrorism in the United States and was rewarded for it by giving the seat of authority over the Office of Gun Violence Prevention. That's my statement in a core.
Yeah.
And so don't be so foolish to think that your opponents or these things that are going on are so surface level and casual. They have consequences. And I want to get into. I'm looking at the clock and looking at our time. We're going to make it work. So
you got all night, brother.
Good. So, did you hear about the 5 goals of the Office of Gun Violence Prevention?
I've heard the general nonsense that it is. I couldn't rattle off the finer points, but it's all corporatese. It's all political corporatese. Very intentionally vague, but also kind of has its pillars of like, hey, we can do this now and we can kind of do this. And as everybody knows, they very intentionally put the very intentional verbiage that they do in these kind of laws, so they can go, oh, well, we never really truly defined where the line is.
Well, this is under the executive branch, so it's not a legislative branch. It's not a legislative body, but they're in support of 5 actions, and this came from the White House, the same White House that doxed CAG. But let's skip past that real quick. We don't want to Barbra Streisand everything here. But so the first one was their first action was a nationwide assault weapons ban, which is great if you're illiterate. Like, you don't know what you're talking about. If you use those words, we can't help you. Like, you're below voting intelligence. Because it targets people who are like, there was a word there was someone who posted a word on Twitter today, which was a word for somebody who thinks their opinion should be respected in every subject, primarily in ones that they know nothing about.
Midwit.
Yeah, we'll go with midwit. It wasn't that one. It had like 6 syllables, so I should have remembered it because I got, I have a degree in pretentiousness, so I have to like look down on everybody. But no, like, you got the first one's an assault weapons ban. The second one is safe storage laws, which is great. Now you're going to have someone checking on whether or not you're storing things safe. The third one is universal background checks, which is either a registry or it's already happening. The fourth one is to remove which is the one that I actually want to talk about here, because the fourth one is the removal of immunities from gun manufacturers from their tools being used in crimes, and then the fifth one is to appoint Kamala Harris as the high czar of appointing police officers. So, now might be a good time to put other on your identity card.
Yeah, right.
So my point being said is, your government issued identity card. The point being said in this one is, one appeals to people who don't even consider knowing anything about a subject to be a predicate for having an opinion on it. 2 applies to people who are capable of first order thinking but not second. 3 applies to people who are capable of first and second order thinking but not third. 4, though, is economic warfare, and that is something that you've seen affect your life and the places that you've seen in this industry.
Yeah, definitely.
And so I am convinced that the brace ruling was not intended to have anything to do with gun control. I am of the opinion right now that the primary motive of the brace ruling was to economically bankrupt parts of the gun industry.
Yeah, it's the same thing with what Gavin Newsom's doing here in California. So, like, for those to kind of like read on what Forrest is talking about, the ATF obviously implemented that brace ruling 3 days on purpose before SHOT Show this last year, and with us at Maximum Defense, it definitely was not helpful. We definitely felt it immediately between our partners, different kind of partners working with us, retail sales. There's that initial chill factor that goes through the community anytime anything like this happens, and they're hyper aware of it. They know what they're doing. And then, of course, Maxim, along with the Firearms Policy Coalition, Gun Owners of America, and a couple other partners, we all sued the ATF. And we've been having a lot of wins with Mock v. Garland out of the Fifth Circuit, but the fight's still going. And every time we get a win, we're able to get a little bit more of our feet underneath us, and that's not to say Maxim having problems, but like everybody in this industry, between the inflation alone, that's you see, I mean, heck, people aren't buying ammo as much right now because it's summertime, and that's normal. Summertime, usually, no matter what is going on, sales start to drop off everywhere in the summer, and they always pick up in the cooler months. And that's universal in gun industry. But the lawfare side of it is real. With California, everyone thinks that we're a bunch of liberal dick sucks, and they're not wrong. Pardon my French. But we give you guys Ronald Reagan. I don't know how, but for better or worse. But all the gun laws in California are being sued right now, and to high success. Now, it's obviously taking a little bit longer than anybody here wants, of course, but again, Roger Benitez down in San Diego, the federal judge there, ruled both the high capacity magazine ban and the assault weapons ban in California is unconstitutional. The 1 in 30 rule is unconstitutional. The background check on ammo unconstitutional. All these laws that they're trying to put on books. And the thing is, they don't care in Sacramento. Like between Javier Becerra, who is the outgoing California Attorney General that is somehow, for some reason, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Javier Baqueira, which Biden couldn't even say his name, he handed it over to Bob Bonta, the current California Attorney General, whose wife sits on the California State Assembly. No freaking conflict of interest there. Between Bob and Javier Baqueira, they've cost the California taxpayer no less than $20 million, losing these Second Amendment lawsuits in the courts. And their arguments, if you actually read them, are so unbelievably dumb. And the Firearms Policy Coalition guys just chew those dudes up like it's their job, because it is. But I mean, they're awesome at it. And so with California, first of all, Gavin Newsom owns ARs. Hey, Gavin, hey, buddy, I know you shoot ARs in your back patio with your cigar and your bourbon. I know that. Okay. And so you get these guys that are open hypocrites, same guy that just met with Xi Jinping today.
Oh, that's going to go over well.
Well, I mean, it's the same guy that shut down schools and churches in California and then was caught at the French Laundry without a mask on 3 days before the mayor of San Francisco, London Breed, also got caught in the same table doing the same thing.
I have their cookbook, the French Laundry. I have their cookbook. Little known fact about myself. I'm an
cigarettes and wine. That is what good the laundries.
Yeah. No, it's I guess now we can put it out in the public. If I ever get the chance to spend time with people, I like to cook.
Yeah.
I come from a culinary family. I guarantee you, my banana bread is better than yours. I'm kidding.
I got some soy chicken though. But the lawfare thing, you're right. It is a lawfare thing. They are trying to disrupt, because the government knows, the nefarious actors in the government knows that their resources are infinite to fight this stuff. And what they're doing also is, and I can talk about it more with the ATF brace ruling situation specifically, is they use a lot of this lawfare and getting everybody spun up as a way for them to garner support and donations during election periods. For instance, like with the ATF brace ban right now, again, I'm not a lawyer and I'm getting my information kind of from my briefings from our teams. The ATF has not yet filed an appeal with our latest W that we got out of the Fifth Circuit. They have until the end of October. And if they don't, there stands to be a very, very good chance that all this pistol brace nonsense is gone come maybe December or January if we're lucky. The ATF and the federal government as a whole doesn't like to admit defeat. So a lot of times they let things just die in court on the vine. And then they can go back to their constituents and their donors in the Democratic Party and be like, oh, we tried. And it's the NRA's fault. That damn NRA. They seem to always be doing the worst of it, right? And so it's a way that they can use gun control measures in 2024 to raise money. You're going to have more mass shootings. You're going to have awful accounts on Twitter, like the Tennessee Holler, which is a giant bot farm that just puts out anti-gun propaganda. You're going to have them doing their thing, and we're going to repeat the same shit we did in 2016, 2021, or 2020. Yeah, it's going to be a good time. Start getting your ammo now.
Yeah, before the price hike.
Well, there's already been fires. Hornady had a fire at their plant.
Yeah. And then we've heard about companies selling, like, what was it? Vista Outdoors sold the ownership of their company to a Czechoslovakian company.
Didn't know that. I know that there's people were tripping out over another major firearms company in the States that everyone's saying stop doing their civilian orders. I've actually not been able to confirm that it actually is true, but I mean, it's going to send a shock through the market. You know, you're going to get, I don't think we're going to get as bad as 2020, where there was a lot of things that went wrong in the market in 2020, like a lot of shit that went wrong in even the 2A industry.
Yeah.
People were
Well,
forgetting that we were waiting 18 months for Vortex Optics for a while there, you know?
yeah, and those people are Johnny on the spot. Like, Vortex is a great company.
Yeah, they're good. They're great.
They're the example of a very large, very successful company that has been very, very good to this industry.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
But they had problems getting things not out of any of their control through the port of Los Angeles, the port of Long Beach. You know, we had 80 boats sitting there for months waiting to get unloaded.
Yeah,
I waited
a long time for my flipper to arrive, only to ruin it in a motorcycle accident.
I mean, you don't have a flipper. Yeah.
No, I don't actually. No, I don't. The body of it is in my case with my SR-25.
It sucks.
Yeah,
But no, I mean, people are going to remember what it's like, you know, when we could sell every shitty gun that was on the rack in a gun store that could never be sold any other year. 2020, we sold every piece of shit, you know, and then you also had 9mm ball going for 88 cents a round, you know, like, boy, those days are coming if we're not careful. Now, I don't want, we as a gun culture also need to be really better about the hoarding thing. And I'm not, as a guy that does hoard, right? As a pot calling the kettle black here, it's not so much that we got to be careful with the hoarding thing, but if we have guys that we know are in this like sphere of influence that we're on gun Twitter, Gunstagram, gun tuber, gun podcasting community, if we got guys that we know are deficient in areas and they're being honest that they need supplies, we need to start cross-loading that stuff. We need to actually, as a gun community, be better about actually being a community, you know, more than just being online, you know, meeting your mutuals, training with those folks, making recommendations for good training companies like Method Endeavors, Tactical Hive, this podcast, the Seaburn guys, Phil from All That Remains, and the way that he's able to tie in all the Phil, what's up, dude? The way they're able to tie all these worlds together. This is the golden age of firearms, and I think people also don't see that. It has never been this good. We have never had this many rights. We have never had this much innovation happening. Like, look what happened. Look what's just happened in the last 6 years. Look what's happened in the last 3 years with innovation in optics, risers, cold hammer forged barrels. I remember somebody that works in the dark side of the Air Force stuff. They made a joke to me like, dude, no one's inventing new bullets. And I'm like, yeah, they are. You know, right now it's the golden age of firearms. And what we saw with Russia and what we will see with China, with poor performing tools, both guns, optics, Navy vessels, hopefully, and guns that can't keyhole after 50 feet, is unlike China and Russia. America is so fucking free that people tend to lose sight of it, that there's nothing stopping Forrest right now quitting the podcast world, getting a $5 million loan with a buddy that's really good at AutoCAD and making the next best thing in the world, right? Like in Russia and China, you don't have those dudes tooling around in their house making new ideas. They don't have the freedom of idea, the freedom of innovation and discovery and patents, and where, I don't know, I'm an annoying optimist. When you come from 275, the rain does stop raining if you stop talking about it, you know.
I did not know that. All right.
Yeah,
Well.
stop talking about it, it magically stops raining. But no, I think it's easy to get black pilled with what's going on right now. I mean, hell, if I don't take breaks off Twitter, I get black pilled too. But if people just take a tactical pause for a minute and look around them, fucking 3D printing, conversation's over. Gun control is fucking forever done. The end. Can't put that smoke back in the bottle.
Yeah, our ability to manufacture is our ability to achieve private manufacturing is moving at a pace that is far out. Well, and this is where that I think of it as tempered optimism. Our ability to the idea of 3D printed guns and the technology that has gone into that as it improves at such a rapid rate is a challenge to the hegemony of some sort of government focused control.
Monopoly on violence, yeah.
Yeah, and that's if we wanted to get into the philosophy of government and we wanted to get into the political philosophy, that's where we'd start talking about governments having monopolies on violence, because it's not really the case. They just have a sort of monopoly on legitimate violence, as it's claimed.
Yeah.
A monopoly of the force of legitimizing violence. If the government says it's okay, it's okay.
Well, you used to only be a misdemeanor to knock a cop out until the 60s, and I'm not saying it needs to go back to that, but like the 60s, between the Summer of Love hippies and then the emergence of the what people know now as 1%er outlaw motorcycle guys. Yeah, I mean, it was like a sport knocking cops out back in the day, and when you're trying to run a society, you can't exactly let people do that. But I don't know what the true answer is, but there probably has been a negative effect where now you've made it where the government can't be touched, and you can't, because everybody understands violence. Violence is better than the gold standard. Gold only means something to me if I need it right now, but if I got a gun in your face, you're only speaking bowels, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, there's the monopoly on violence that only the government has. And again, I want to be very cautious to anyone listening here. We're not saying that it's a good thing that the people should be allowed to just wantonly hurt agents of the state, because unlike most countries, I think America has a culture and spirit still rooted in taking care of its actual community.
Yeah, I think that's a red herring, or it's the iron law of woke projection, to be very clear. There's a consistency that can be observed across humanity, and that is that those who are the most capable of violence are the ones who are least likely to participate in it, or least participatory, especially in casual violence. And it's exactly what you see. It's exactly what you like. The fact that this has to be described is always so. It's not that it's not. It's astounding. It's that it's a shaking of the tree, recognizing that I'm so deep in this part of the culture and the community and the conversation that for me, this is. Come on. I am now a fuzzy individual. Let's see.
Your webcam's nearsighted.
Yeah, I'm actually plugged into it.
We need socialized healthcare so we can fix these cameras.
Yes.
There you
go. I am now a real person again. But so the yeah, that was actually that was cool. I need to change a setting on the camera. The camera that we're using is an X-T3 by Fujifilm. That's why the color scale is so beautiful. So the point being said is the fact that this needs to be stated is actually really helpful. You go into a bar, the person who's most likely to get into a bar fight is probably the least likely, the least capable, or the least really dangerous. Now, there's a certain value in that, is that people can express and not go to blows quickly and then not kill each other. Like, there's a value in an honor system of being able to challenge each other without going straight to like knives.
Mutual combat.
Mutual combat. Now, again, we don't want to. It's not like we're just suggesting everything should go, pistols at dawn. But hey,
if there was the ability to snuff shit out, I
think,
yeah,
and we're gonna we could even expand it. Like I think that there needs to be some sort of honor code, especially between people, that give them that doesn't give them, but it's that their mechanism of interacting with each other that isn't based.
There are outlaws in this country with honor.
Yeah. Well, no, that's exactly what it is, though. It's the difference between an outlaw and a criminal. An outlaw is somebody who has a code of honor and they have an ethics system, and that ethics system might be in contrast with the laws of the country that they are existing in. They understand that there's a legitimate case for a government, and that government might be acting outside of the legitimacy of their position, and that the person is at odds with that acting out. And an outlaw will do what they're doing because they say it is the right thing to do, and they will do it with a semblance of conviction. A criminal is a person who breaks the law for the sake of breaking the law.
Typically, they have antisocial personality disorder
or
stuff going on. Yeah.
they do not have a legitimate claim to an ethical position.
Well,
They're
motorcycle
just saying
clubs is a perfect
they're
example of that.
Mhm.
Mafia is a perfect example of that. There's criminals in mafia organizations. There's criminals in
Oh, hell
1%
yeah.
clubs. But if you've, and this is where I wish cops could stop watching so much TV and people would stop thinking that bikers are the way they are. Because if you were to go into like for example, a Hells Angels clubhouse and you're invited there, of course, it's honestly one of the safest places you could ever be because of that code that exists there. There's certain rules that you are expected not to break. Most of the time, if you don't know, a lot of times those guys are actually a lot more gracious than you might be aware of to you
Mhm.
making like a social faux pas that's minor in their house. But
Mhm.
the idea is like, hey, you're in my house. We don't come and rat pack people here. We have a code here. Your bike does not need to be locked if it's parked in front of our clubhouse. Like it's
Yeah.
protected here. You don't allow your prospects to go just beat up another guy in another bar because there's serious political ramifications to these 1% clubs that coexist in some of these communities that, hey, like we've got some peace going on right now, guys. Like another perfect example will be a certain club that's mostly known to be in Texas that has a sombrero on it. They have had a diametrically opposed schism with their European counterparts, so much that they changed the center patch in this place in Texas for this club because of this. Like, hey, the cops and the robbers have a dance. Not a lot of times they have a mutual understanding. Typically, organized crime syndicates, outlaw syndicates don't just go attack cops because they know what happens when you do that. And they understand to not disrespect the cops because the cops still are going to be looking for them, right? Don't
Yeah.
disrespect them for being dumb. They're going to look for you still, guys. And versus
Yeah.
like you criminal that's like rat packing a CVS and killing the fucking minimum wage paid Securitas security guard in the parking lot with one punch.
Yeah. Well, I have to rein it in a little bit because
Yes.
we're again getting kind of we're in danger of getting into the weeds, but I definitely get your point here. In that there seems to be a difference because at least within the outlaw and the government, there's a respect of honor and capability. Whereas a criminal, in this sense of this sort of weird criminality, is most oftentimes seen in sort of an oppressor-oppressed nature, where it defines people and describes them as ontological categories. Right. So like so like I can have an issue with the state, the idea of the state, right? I'm not a libertarian in that sense, but whatever. I can have an issue with the idea of the state, as in like this idea of the state. I can have a challenge to a specific state, like the federal government of the United States. I could say, you say this, but you're doing that, or this code that you've written is immoral or illegal. I can say that an operation within that state, a function of it is malfunctioning, a component of it is malfunctioning, and I can say that the person who is acting as an agent of the state, who is a police officer, is doing something wrong.
Yeah.
Those are all different distinction levels.
Yeah, sure.
A criminal is and what I think is an important element here is that an outlaw is going to skew closer towards the individuals and the humanity of those who are participating. And this is a bit of a descriptive game, don't get me wrong. But in the sense of what an outlaw functions is that the people are all people, whereas the criminal is some sort of is kind of like it goes towards the ontological category of a holy war against the state or something like that. And this is where you get that criminality. But what was most important in regards to how we were even getting here was that the people who exist in this sort of criminality environment are typically very bad at use of force. They're just not very good at it. They're not very good at violence. Let's just be clear. Like, I don't care how many rap videos you have, you're probably not very good at fighting. And the what is it? The FAFO principle is going to come into effect one day for you.
Yeah.
And then the other side about it, though, is that those who are they're also the most likely to call for violence. Go into look at Twitter, and go and observe sort of an inner city gang, especially amongst the active participants. The gang is certainly dangerous, but it's not because of the individuals; it's because of the community. Because they will do it on their own, right? They will. It's sort of, how do I say it? It's permissible. The idea of giving a 16-year-old or a 15-year-old a handgun with a switch on it and sending him to go do a hit on somebody is permissible in that environment. That's what makes it dangerous. It's not that the fact that that kid has got a gun and he's super capable with it. It's that that community has said, it's not my problem. It's not my block.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, that is a non-functional society. You have failed at culture. Restart and try again. The other side of it is the Twitter thing. How many people, like, Twitter is a gold mine for open source information. It is a gold mine, and I keep bringing this up, for open source information. The running list, like, if you wanted to, you could make a running list of the names and personalities who have gone out of the blue, out of pocket, and called for violence on Twitter. And I'm not talking about this gray area violence of like words are violence, or
acts. Yeah.
I'm saying everything from you can't fight against us because we'll bomb you with our F-16s, to this attitude of we're gonna kick down your door and take your guns, and anyone who owns guns should be thrown into a wood chipper. Like,
or beyond Chicago supporting the Palestinian Hamas fighters. Yeah.
I think I'm going to push against that a little bit. That is supporting somebody else. There is a gray. I'm not saying it's moral, but there's a gray area. I'm talking about open source information, open source intel, where you're like, Twitter username, Corncob said, I'm sorry to whoever's got the Twitter name Corncob. Congratulations for scoring that one. But, Twitter username Corncob said, or, Melissa Cobb-Smith. I'm sorry if your name is Melissa Cobb-Smith, because you're probably British, and that's great, but we won in 1776. Joke. And but like, they're like, they will go onto Twitter and they will say, we should do violence against you.
Yeah.
They're like, I know who that is now. Do they live in my environment? Are they in my in my neighborhood? So if you're familiar with all the neighbors in your area, and one of them got on Twitter and said, we should do a jihad against my neighbors, you'd probably not look at them like, oh, hey, how's it going? Maybe we want to talk about this. More like, that person's a threat and they're a danger, and I'm going to make sure that they get isolated out, because they're not going to become a pretty little pearl. They've already openly stated that they're willing to do violence. So yeah. Not in the ambiguity that's accused of people, but in a very clear sense. Twitter does that. But what do you find common with these people? I mean, you see it on Twitter all the time. Some dude will get up on Twitter and he will be advocating for violence, and then somebody will go to his profile and look at his profile picture, and you're like, dude, you've got Mount Vesuvius for a chin. You know what I mean? No one's really worried about you doing the violence. I don't think one S-Fest would do the job, buddy, kind of thing, right? So, there's this consistency, though. It's like, that person who sees themselves as some sort of activist, holier than thou, ontological category different, is willing to call for violence. And then you look at them and you go, I mean, you're a non-threat, but you're not completely a non-threat, because you're advocating and you're willing to send somebody else to do violence on your behalf.
Sure.
And I think there's a consistency there. Those who are most capable of violence are the least likely to participate in it. And so that should motivate you to go train. Go get good at guns so you know how to use it, when and why. And be very, very contained into when not to use it. So there's that part. And then the other one is, don't surround yourself with loudmouths who are making calls for violence. Shame them. Shame on them. But I think I killed that one with my monologue.
No. I agree. They're, like you said, kind of to bring it back. it's an open source. You can make a list of people that have called for that violence. They're comedically unprepared for it. Again, that kid that runs the what if alt list, he called him something. I think he called him like adversity virgins, something like that. You know, people that have never been socked in the chin or never had a bloody nose. One, to realize that a bloody nose isn't going to kill you. A, and two, a bloody nose still does hurt. You know, and like you and those people that are always, like you said, the ones that want to buck it up in the bar the most, the ones that have least capable, and they're the least fluent in violence, they're the least proficient in it. You know, though they're the ones that they just wail. You know, they just do this number. They're wearing their affliction shirts and doing Jaeger bombs. And yeah, those were the guys that we always had at Scruffy Murphy's or at the Swiss on 6th Ave and or at the Swiss in Tacoma or 6th Ave and out there. It's yeah, and you know the thing is with anyone that practices like an actual martial art, like whether it's jujitsu or striking, like Muay Thai or anything like that. Anyone that's ever been popped in the nose, like with a good sparring partner, or ever had just like themselves beaten with the earth with a good judo takedown, you go, oh God, I don't want to do this at all. And so you want to become more proficient at it so it doesn't happen to you. But you also realize that, like, hey, I actually know what I'm doing here. You don't. If I really wanted to, I could beat the brakes off of you right now. Like it's my fucking job. And I'm going to be the one more in trouble for it. You know, especially given the political climate that it is right now. You know, you've got terrible example was that YouTuber that was harassing that dude at the food court and that dude shot him. You know, that's probably a really bad example of guys fucking around and finding out and a message being sent to people like, hey, leave each other the fuck alone. But at the same time, we talked about that, like, do we need necessarily to have pistols and bars back like old Prescott days? No. But no, right? But at the same time, you police that shit up socially by having bad examples get weeded out ahead of time, right? Like when people when people see people pissing on electric fences, they start to maybe not want to piss there. And with the West in general, but America especially, we've had a massive problem with social media making people think that they can say shit like that and get away with it. And you know, and it makes people more brazen because currently for a lot of those people the only real life that exists is online.
Yeah, well, I mean that's a self-correcting error. It really is. I think there's a lot of there's a criticism that gets thrown around quite often in gun culture, which is this idea of like the terminally online, like go out and touch grass.
Yeah.
And I understand it, and I think most of the time it's I think it's oftentimes stated out of genuine conviction and concern for one another, like, hey man, you're getting really wound up in these arguments and these things on the internet. You should probably go outside. Let's go to the range and stuff. I think that I believe that genuinely happens. Like I don't experience it very often, but it does. And so my point being said in this one is, yeah, you know, I think there's a good amount of people within our community that says, "Hey, man, you're getting a little wound tight around the axle. We should go out and do something." And I think that's a good thing, and it should happen more, and it should be encouraged. But in addition to that, it's not a I support the Second Amendment, but it's a in addition to that, we have a statement here which is as it's fleeting before my eyes, the issues that we face are simultaneously simple and right before our eyes. I see it, I know it when I see it, and complex in the sense that it is complicated by the bad intentions of those who have ill will towards us. The person who is more trained in a fighting skill should not be held to a different ethical standard than the person who is not trained but willing to engage in it. It's called it's called being an adult.
Yeah.
And I think the I think that can be distinguished from partisan malicious prosecutors who will go after capable people for the sake of making a point, or
Like
because they are racistly motivated for the destruction of another population.
Sure. And I think the Rittenhouse trial is a good example of that. And Kyle, if you're listening to this, hey buddy. No, on one hand, the whole thing that happened with Kenosha was a giant tragedy, not just because a pedophile got killed, no fucking harm, no foul there, but the fact that a 17-year-old kid had to be thrusted into history because the adults that were supposed to be running the show didn't. And you had a kid who got, for better or worse, was there. All this shit started to unravel. And you've got absolutely bad actors who went after this kid, and he did what he did. And then the whole trial itself was meant to be a message to everybody else. Don't you try, So thank God he didn't get convicted for multiple reasons. One, because he didn't do anything wrong. Two, it's for everybody else, like for instance, like that couple in, was it Missouri, that was standing on the husband and wife standing with their guns, and she's holding they got in trouble for that. And it's like, for what? Like, I mean, for the love of God, what is the point of our firearms if not to send that message? Like Iraq and Afghanistan is a perfect microcosm of it, because they always knew not who we were, but they always knew that the special operations troops were not the regular guys, because of the way we looked, because of the guns that we carried, because of our tattoos and patches, but also because they knew our vehicles looked like fucking porcupines running down the road. And if you touch it, you're going to get stung. And what's the point of having the ability as a deterrent, a force deterrent, with having your firearm standing in your yard when you have people broke into your community? That is, if there was ever a reason for someone to have been able to stand on their front yard with a gun, it was that couple in Missouri.
Yeah, it was. And I know that it was there's like, as far as I understand and I remember from the facts of the case, is that neither of the guns were loaded. I don't think either of them were operable, actually. I think if I remember, and
You might be right. I think I have heard something.
I'm considerable. I think I'm quite confident in this one. One of the firearms that was being displayed was not only unloaded, or it was inoperable, as in like the firing pin or something was removed.
Yeah.
And the judge instructed the evidence department or whatever to reconfigure the firearm so that it could be operable, so that she, like that's what she instructed them to do. So the point being said is, she altered evidence for the sake of it, for the sake of a political hack job, which the citizens of Missouri deserve due recourse of grievances.
Well,
your government defrauded your elected official, your DA defrauded your people and your government by lying to them about something that took place. So just by doing that, the McCloskeys was their family.
Yeah.
In an honest court of law, should be scot-free with the ability to sue.
Yes.
Because what they had to go through now is they had to go through the process of being threatened in their homes. Don't come at me with this garbage that a mob of people with pitchforks or a mob of people bursting through your gate is not a threat when they support Black Lives Matter, but is absolutely a threat when they have tiki torches. Don't come at me with that.
Yeah.
Don't, and then the second one is, because like no one's, whatever. We're gonna get off.
We're not defending those guys. Yeah, you shouldn't.
No one's defending them, but it's like the egregious nature of it. The egregious nature of that kind of argument depends on the conscience and the goodwill of the person being accused in order to be effective. They're literally dependent on you saying, well, I mean, I think there's something right to be here, so that they can use it against you, not honestly, not in a conversation that values integrity, but because they say things like no truth but power. When a communist calls himself a communist, you are now given carte blanche permission to understand that everything that they say to you is couched in the potentiality of achieving power for the sake of power itself.
Yeah, I'm probably going to misattribute this quote to Michael Malice, but I think it was him that said, the right or the conservatives or the Republicans are going to be the ones standing against the wall saying, how come you can do this and I can't, as they put a bullet through your fucking brain,
It does sound like a Michael Malice quote.
Yeah, I think either he said it directly or he parroted it. It's not important, but it's the truth. I'm so sick and tired, and I'm not a Republican. I'm fairly politically homeless, but I would consider myself center right, of course. And I'm so sick and tired of this. Like, how come you can do this and I can't? Thing that I read online. Hey, enough of it. Start doing it to them. If you read what happened in the Russian Revolution with the Marxists and in the 1917 shit. Read Pyotr Frankl's book, Always with Honor, and he comes from a perspective of a man that fought for the imperialist army and watched the Reds take over, and then watched everything in his own officer corps deteriorate into the Civil War.
Bolsheviks.
Yeah, and then the Bolsheviks too. One of the brilliant tactics they did is they dumped all the prisons and the insane asylums, and they gave all these grievanced people rifles and red stars. And it's the same thing in the United States. We have just rebranded the Marxism, the Leninism, and the Maoism in the United States to an American palette, where it's like the original sin of slavery and racism.
Yeah.
The
It's a government first religion.
Here's the thing. American Marxism, American communist praxis is more dangerous than it is anywhere else in the world if you think about it, because every other country that had these Marxist and communist revolutions, there was something that they could fix, and that was the supposed inequality of the classes or the money. In America, we can't fix immutable characteristics of race and supposedly what fucking gender you are. So people something that can never die. They'll never not be able to have that power come into some level of symbiotic homeostasis, because in Marxism, it's never been truly achieved. Well, they were working to it, even though it wasn't possible. They were working to something because they all looked the same. In the United States, we can't do that. So you're always going to have, and it sucks for like a lot of the African American community in the United States. They've always been the ones targeted by foreign Marxist actors in the United States, especially in the 50s and 60s, because let's be honest, a lot of the shit that happened to the African American community up until the 50s and 60s was obviously abominable.
Yeah, but when you embrace the anti-culture as your new culture, you forsake any claim to the legitimacy of a prior existing culture.
But you have to look at, and I'm not trying to make excuses for the way that a lot of folks act and behave nowadays, but if you look at the damage that was done in the long form, insidious, long walk through the institution shit that was done a lot to the Black and brown community in the United States, and then I'm going to put my little lefty hat on for a little bit here. Yeah, I mean, they were, I think the government probably definitely targeted some of those communities with like the crack epidemic and, lawfare by keeping Black men out of the family for weed charges. If you want to fix the Black and brown community and a lot of the problems that we have with them, you need to give them complete forgiveness for those minor weed offenses down, not at the federal level, because nobody gets the small weed offense at the federal level, Biden. It's all the civil shit. You need to allow them to vote. You need to allow them to get good jobs and their credits to be repaired. You need to be giving pardons and expunging records for things that we now know that are nonsense, and that's the weed stuff. Now, if a guy's moving tons of it, that's a different story. But to re-enfranchise the male in the home for a lot of these people is one of the many ways that we could fix this. But the Marxists don't want to do that, because the second you say that, hey, there is a solution here and it has nothing to do with our race, but it just so happens to be that some races, yes, have been more harmed by these policies than others, then you get these American Marxists lose their minds, because now there's a solution and then we can fix it. But if we always focus on this immutable characteristics, Black, brown, Native, and LGBTQ R2D2s, you can't ever fix. You're always going to be an R2D2, right? So it's always going to be these cis hetero white males. We are the original gangsters, apparently, in Western American society. So for the Marxists, that is something that they'll never not be able to unbrand.
It's not so conspiratorial. It's something much more simple. They write it out in their doctrine. They say things like
there's some conspiracy to it. I disagree. I think there is a marketed level. I think there has been a long time of people using focus groups and testing on this Marxist.
Okay, yeah, you're correct. You're correcting me. There is a conspiratorial nature to it for sure. Yeah, I'm sorry. I think I might have misspoken.
Concept and BLM Incorporated are very different, right? BLM Incorporated, nefarious. BLM, the spirit of it, we understand it.
Yeah, I mean the spirit of BLM itself is just personified resentment.
Yeah, but it's just monetized it when they incorporated it.
Yeah, I mean it's like it's having a tribe. It's like it's a gang. It's it's a very simplistic ideology. I've read their literature. It's not exactly you know, a treatise of dissertations. It's like,
They're
well,
Jacobins. Yeah, they're Jacobins, you know.
so the point that I'm saying here is the point that I'm saying in this component, though, and that's probably a little bit too harsh way of saying it, but fine, is that the thing that's being presented in that argument is the idea of if your core value is there's no truth but power, then you're going to take advantage of any grievance that you can see witnessed in your environment. And then when that grievance is no longer convenient for you, it will be discarded by. Case in point example, as soon as Biden got into his office, what did he do to Black Lives Matter? Literally turned and kicked him out the door. Hey, you're not useful anymore, right? So your grievance served its purpose, but now you're not helping. So go away. And I know that some people like to say, well, you know, the liberals will get the wall too, and that sounds like a bunch of, you know, kind of aggressive, egregious mentality. But I want to get cut to the spirit of the idea. If your worldview is something like no truth but power, then any bedfellow, strange bedfellows, or what do they call it, fellow travelers, can be used and disposed of ad infinitum without any moral consequence.
Well, they did that. They absolutely did that in Russia. They absolutely did that in
Yep,
China.
and
Stalin hurt people to the means to the end.
And so when you have this issue where you have these drug charges that are being used to isolate the fathers from the home, the reason why the Marxists and the left, one of the causes and the reasons why the Marxists and the left cannot accept the fact that they have created the problem of fatherlessness is because fatherlessness is not a problem. Your dad is not your father. Your dad is the government. It is a theological foundation where the church and the godhood of humanity is found in the state. You don't need a father, you need a government. Your single mother isn't single. She's got a government.
Absolutely.
And so the problem that you've done with this entire population of people, and why I refer to it as the anti-culture, is that you have sacrificed your humanity. You're still human, but you've sacrificed your culture on the altar of the government. You said, this is what we believed, that we wanted to have. We wanted to have rights in our community, and we wanted to have our own property. We wanted to have our slice of the American pie. And then you took that idea of being a free man in America, you packaged it up, you put it on the altar, you stabbed it with a Marxist knife and said, we don't need that dream anymore. The future is government. The government is my God. And why? Because becoming part of the government is so much more achievable than ascending to literal godhood. But that's what it is. From a theological worldview, this whole thing, or not from a theological worldview, the whole idea that's being described and exhorted and demanded is a religion. But at the top of it is the state. It is the de facto separation of the church and state by taking the pulpit, turning it into a crown, and putting it on the head of the state.
And I think the best example that we ever saw in the world of that so far is either in the Kim dynasty in Korea or the Khmer Rouge with Pol Pot, especially, you know, that, you know, even more in Pol Pot's Khmer Rouge, because they absolutely replaced the family with the state. You know, they literally had the camps with children killing their parents. It's kind of like what the killing fields were known for. Like, obviously, that definitely happened in other countries, but I think at the systematic level, I don't think we've seen anything like that, like we did in Cambodia. That's pretty incredible.
Pretty horrifying. So let's do a hard segue.
Sure.
Let's do a really, really aggressive one. Everyone's been like,
slip away.
I know, slip away, right? Because I have a feeling we could go for a long time on this, but I think we've actually gotten the good details out.
Sure.
There's something that I've been wanting to hear you talk about, and I've been wanting to hear you talk about it for a while. And for those who are still listening to the podcast, I hope that you've enjoyed the last 2 hours of our conversation, getting into the nitty-gritty details on some of the things that we understand in worldviews. But there's something that I wanted that you have. There's an expertise that you have that is relevant to not only the community who listens to this, but to the gun culture as a whole. You said you were a Ranger medic, and one thing that gets brought up quite frequently in the gun culture on various levels is, you know, if you're going to carry a gun, you probably should carry a tourniquet. And there's companies like Snake Staff Systems that make carryable tourniquets, and I've got a couple. Very happy with one. I actually had one strapped onto my motorcycle when I crashed last time. Good stuff.
Good deal.
Glad that I had it, really. Didn't need it, but glad that I had it. I had just put it on like 2 days prior. It's kind of ridiculous. I'm not saying that it caused a wind turbulation for the bike to fall over. I'm saying that it was just like, when I was like picking the gravel off my arm and getting ready to ride back home, I was like, I'm really glad I had that. So, didn't have to use it, but I'm glad I had it. I broke the chem light though. Weird. But okay, so if you're going to talk, if you're talking to somebody who's been in gun culture for a while, like myself, how would you suggest somebody approach medical gear, skill set retention, and medical gear and skill set retention for a citizen who is not in a professional organization, which would provide it? It means most of this is coming out of their own dollar.
Mm-hmm.
And who may or may not be involved in a community, but is certainly interested in one. So you've got a family. I'll use myself as an example. I own a home. I have a family. I drive a car. But I've learned a couple of things. I know how to use a tourniquet. I know how to use a pressure dressing. I know how to use this stuff. But my equipment has spread out over time, and I need to restart. I need to come back fresh, and I don't know how to do it. How would you what would you recommend for somebody in my position?
All right. Yeah, we got a couple things going on there. So like the level we want to start is at the most basic and focus on the fundamentals. A lot of guys will look at, a former Ranger medic or an 18 Delta or a PJ and see that we can carry blood on us and we're doing TXA and all this sexy medicine and chest tubes and crike kits. But really, what makes a Ranger medic, especially like the best medic on the battlefield, is the mastery of the basics. Anyone can drop a crike into a patient, but if the guy's been dead the whole time, you just package up an expensive dead body, really. So we want to get a good baseline, and sometimes that can start in places that people might not anticipate, like taking a CPR class. Take an American Heart Association first aid CPR class so you understand how to do a Heimlich maneuver, how to do the right compression and breath ratios for children, for single rescue or CPR, double rescue or multi-rescue CPR, et cetera, right? Because if you've never done CPR on somebody that actually needs it before, you'll find out real fast that it's an exhaustive process and it doesn't always work like it does in the movies, right? So and then maybe like a good stop the bleed class. There's a lot of companies that have really good stop the bleed programs out there. That's going to be one that we want to focus on a lot, because as we learned out of Vietnam and the global war on terror, and I'm sure we'll see if there's any moderate chance of good notes being taken in Ukraine, that we'll see the majority of people that died on the battlefield that could have been saved. It'll still be that they died of bleeding for wounds that could have used tourniquets or compressible dressings, right? So that's why stop the bleed is something that I would recommend people go to before they go to like a TCCC class. Having that tourniquet on you, having a quality tourniquet that you didn't buy off of Amazon. North American Rescue is a good company. Focus Group's a really good company. I apologize, I don't remember the name of the company you just mentioned. I'm curious to check out their stuff.
Snake Staff Systems.
Snake Staffs, yeah. Finding a company that's got quality tourniquets, cat tourniquets, soft tees. Yes, those rats tourniquets aren't as bad as everyone thinks they are. And there's some stuff that I need to continue to do personally and to look into, that they actually do what they say they do, and they can work on adults. It's not just for dogs and pediatrics. But, if you're someone that's going to be training to do fire and maneuver kind of shooting, whether that's in a military unit, law enforcement, or just a motivated patriot locking down your corner in your neighborhood, you should have an IFAK on you, an individual first aid kit. You don't necessarily need the 14 or 12 gauge needles to do decompressions. Don't everybody get their mind too wrapped up on that. But you need to have the basics: tourniquets, pressure dressings, a hemostatic dressing, not just a bunch of gauze that you can shove into a hole, though if you don't have anything, that's still good. But having that special, like a quick clot or combat gauze, something that has a chemical reaction with blood for like non-compressible injuries and axillary pockets, inguinal wounds, necks, heads, Any
Can
you
I
know,
can I can I ask a question about that hemostatic
Sure.
agent? So when I was in the service, a good friend of mine was allergic to shellfish, and at the
Mhm.
time, the quick clot used like a shellfish base. Is that still the case? Are we still looking at that kind of information, or is that
I think they've mostly phased that out. I'm gonna probably misspeak, and I want to ask folks to make sure they check into it on their own. And I'm actually happy you brought that point up. If you've got antiquated, expired medicines, not all medicines need to be thrown out after expiration dates, and we can talk about that, like saline water, for example. But hemostatic dressings, I would probably swap them out. You know, the idea is to give yourself the best chance possible with a tool that is very specifically designed for a purpose, like a hemostatic dressing. You know, saltwater saline bags, it's salt water. It's not going to expire. If the bag itself isn't compromised, it's still going to be salt water. EpiPens, you know, they expire after 18 months. No, they don't. They, after 60 months, still hold 80% of their effectiveness, which is more than enough for anaphylactic shock, which is what they're designed for. So don't throw the baby out with the bathwater all the time with some of your equipment. Like for a lot of us have old school army cravats, those green cravats. Those things are worth their weight in gold. Never throw those things away. You know, I even as a SOCA medic, I still carry old school tools on me because they work, you know, like sticks and rags, you know. It's not always the most high-end, expensive stuff that's coming out of some of these manufacturers. Sometimes it's train with it, right? Like if you have get a blue tourniquet or orange tourniquet, one that's dedicated to just training, and as often as you're doing a range day, you should do a couple tourniquet drills. Throw one on your leg, throw one on your arm, do it offhand. If you're sitting in your car, especially if you're a cop listening to this, you should be practicing putting tourniquets on in a vehicle. If you're a contractor doing overseas work, you need to be practicing doing tourniquets on in a vehicle. If you're a contractor and you're doing executive protection work, you need to be practicing putting tourniquets on a person that isn't you in a vehicle, right? Um, when we do Ranger Battalion stuff, you know, one of the things that's one of our main points of performance that we focus on is medical, right? It's not just the marksmanship, it's not just the communications, it's not just the PT and the all the, you know, the air operations. We work on everyone here that has been in Ranger Battalion knows you could be the studiest of studs, and if you fail the medical portion through rip or rope or rasp, you are not going to make it to battalion. You have to be able to do these sticks and rags. So that's the emphasis that we want to push on is if you're going to carry a gun, you need to be ready to save both the lives of the people that you are trying to protect, and God forbid that you need to render aid to somebody that maybe wasn't actually a threat. What if you had a blue on blue in a dark situation here? What if your cousin is coming over to your house unannounced after the grid goes down because a tornado just happened and you're just so amped up because you can't get off of Twitter and you pop, you know, your cousin in the calf on the driveway? You know, it's like, so you never, chance favors the prepared. And so one of those is medicine, right? So we want to make sure we start focusing on the basics. Get a CPR class and get a stop
yeah?
beat class.
I think I'm willing to bet that, and this is well, I'm not willing to bet. I can say with 100% certainty that people fit within three categories. They're either never going to do it, they're never going to concern themselves with their medical status, and that's, or they're already concerned with it, or they're on the fence and getting motivated. And why I had to go back to, it's like, I'm going to make a bet. It's not a bet. It's 100%. I just described everybody. You know, you're either a boy or a girl. Well, you're either alive or dead. Like, okay, there isn't a third option. All right.
Yeah.
But my point being said is that I think for a lot of gun culture, especially the people who listen to this show, they're already in the mindset of, yes, I should. But what they're dealing, what I'm struggling with, and I'm thinking through myself right now, and why I wanted to have this conversation with you is because I know I'm not alone in this one. But it's that, okay, I'm not new to this, but I've been sort of coasting for a while, or I'm not new to this. I've got a little bit of the basics down. I've got a lot of the basics down, so I'm rather confident in my ability to deal with egregious injuries, especially ones related to violence or car crashes or you know issues related to it. Doesn't matter, right? I'm confident in my own abilities. That light's probably going to go out here in a second, but okay. I'm confident in my abilities, but where I'm recognizing is that chaos has entered the chat.
Mm-hmm.
And what that chaos looks like for me is, okay, I've been comfortable for too long. Now I need to go back to being uncomfortable and say, I can make some adjustments, but I want to make sure I want to be able to go from where I'm at to a little bit better off, and that's looking at it as a whole. Because I've got my kit. On my kit, I've got multiple kits, but on my kits, I've got an IFAK.
Yeah.
Right, and each one of those has, and I'm at the point where I'm pretty sure I need to restock them. So I've got IFAKs that need to be readjusted. How do I want to go about that? I've also got a larger aid bag that is basically all bleeding. It's all tourniquets and TQs and gauze and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then I've got a couple of other things like a Skedco, and I've got some other kits and pieces and things. And what I need to do is I need to consolidate it and go all the way through it all. But I don't really know where to start other than, well, I'll start with my TQ. And so what does a good holistic medical system look like for a guy that's not quite a medic, but is definitely in that RFR, Ranger First Responder level, who's like, okay, I want to look at my kit that I carry. Maybe I'm in a position where I can double up. I want to make sure I've got the same med pouch on every belt or whatever it is. And I'm concerned about myself, my wife or husband, and let's be honest, most people who listen to this are dudes, but there are wives in the chat. Howdy. And then there are but like myself, my home, and now I'm starting to look at potential mass cal situations because I live in or near a city. I've got friends, family members, nieces and nephews, uncles and aunts, and I need to be able to go from, you know what, there's a chance that I'm going to be there, and I don't want to be, and I'm not in my headspace is good enough. And this is where I think people want to be. Like, this is an encouraging statement. Gun culture is trying to figure out how they can be an asset to their community. They're not trying to get the, oh, I got to get out of there. I got to get off the X. Like, yes, sometimes you have to get off the X, but also there are times where it's like,
you might not be.
No, I maybe like, okay, dude. Let's use an example. An easy example. You live in Minnesota. The police response time is 45 minutes because they don't care or whatever. They're a captured institution. And I'm sorry if you work for the Minnesota Police Department. Like, I really am genuinely sorry. You get a bad rap, you've got a hard job. But it doesn't matter. It's winter. It's whatever. Pick your example. You're down in Arizona and there's a sandstorm. And you're at a mall or you're at a church and a bad thing happens. And you now want to be in a position where you're not going, well, I got to get away, because it's your congregation.
You can be an asset. Yeah.
Yeah. And so you're not going to be the doctor that saves everybody's lives, but you're going to make damn sure that you do everything that you can so that as the ambulance starts arriving, you can pass off a semi-stabilized patient.
Sure.
That's who I really think. That's where I think most of this gun culture really is. You've got people who are just figuring out how to do an IFAK, and they've never, and that CPR class is fantastic. I've taken one myself. Yes, me, Force Cooper, Army Ranger, 7 deployments, blah, 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 have gone to a CPR class after service. And then you've got your Stop the Bleed classes. Excellent. TCCC tends to be a little advanced, usually for people who are pursuing a career in some position, but not always the case.
Sure.
Citizens take CQB classes, right?
Yeah.
We've got your IFAK squared away, or you're looking at restocking it, but now you exist in a community, a church, whatever. How would you approach that?
So let's kind of stay and start at the individual level, the IFAK. So if we're going to be speaking to a crowd of people that have heard the acronym MARCH before for TCCC, let's kind of focus on the MARCH. So the massive hemorrhage, we want to make sure we have at least 2 tourniquets. We at least have the bandages and the quick clot, or like a hemostatic agent like combat gauze. We want to have at least a nasal pharyngeal airway, an NPA, the one that goes up your nose that no one enjoys. So that's going to carry our A for the MARCH. Now we have our respirations. That's going to involve having 2 chest seals, right? Whether they're halo, hyphens, Bolin, whatever, or even just 3-sided tape over, some sort of wrapper occlusive, like a hasty dressing, right? So that covers our respirations. Now, our circulation, that's not exactly something that we're going to be at the individual level worried about as far as like fixing for somebody. That's going to be more of a medic kind of thing with IVs and stuff. But for us as the individual level, our circulation stuff, we still want to, that's more going to be on that ability to like do assessment on patients. But the hypothermia thing, that's something that as individuals we need to be aware of. Having like a small space blanket or a rescue blanket in an IFAK. Now to build above that IFAK, or that IFAK, let's say you're a guy that's got a church that he's kind of responsible for, or that you're traveling with more people and you want to have a little bit more of a load out bag. Basically, you're going to take everything that's in your individual kit and you're just going to expand upon it. More tourniquets, more bandages, more chest seals. If you're a more advanced kind of a practitioner, maybe then we'll start talking about needle decompression needles. That is a very low priority for most people. And that is because statistically speaking, even trained people miss it. If you can't rattle off real fast to me what the 2 landmarks are for where you would do that, you probably shouldn't be carrying it. That's the second and the fifth, rib spaces for those of you playing the home game.
Yeah, it's like I always mistake it as the second metacarpal phase.
Yeah. But yeah, so don't get wrapped around having needle Ds so much. But as you expand upon what the individual first aid kit's going to be, that's basically what your squad level or your Boy Scout troop level maybe coverage should be. Just more of the same. Now, if you're going to be a actual person in your community or your fire team, whether it's your professional team or it's your community organized team that's more in a role for a medic, that's when you need to start looking at taking more of some actual formal classes, an actual TCCC class. And for what it's worth, TCCC is not something that isn't geared to the average person. I wouldn't say that should be the first class you ever take, but TCCC is just the actions taken on a battlefield by anybody, really. Like, I don't become an advanced tactical practitioner, ranger medic until we start doing more acute or we start doing more involved care for the patient with like my drugs, my resuscitation algorithms. That's more of the advanced ATP SOCM medic stuff. But general run-of-the-mill TCCC is for everybody. Knowing what to do in the care under fire phase of patient assessments, knowing what to do with rapid field assessments, and then your tactical evac, CASEVAC or TACIVAC phase of care, hypothermia, the SCEDCO stuff. Now that's, again, if you're anybody that's on any kind of an organized team, you should have an idea of what TCCC looks like, even if it's not your job. But if you're going to be a medic or an advanced EMT or just the EMT on a team, look at companies like DARC, right? They've got the Tactical Urban Sustainment course that is not entirely necessarily geared to medicine yet. But it is something that, hey, if you're drinking shitty water, medical is going to be something that you learn real fast. Because water's king, baby. Courses at Darcy, Tactical Hive, Method Endeavors. Again, I keep naming some of these folks. And full disclosure, I do have a bit of a relationship with most of these that I'm naming, but there are plenty of companies that I'm not associated with, like T1G. That would be a great place for you guys to take medical classes. North American Rescue puts on medical classes. I think Focus Group does. There's a lot of snake oil bullshit salesmen out of there. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with somebody that used to be an 11 Bravo or 0311 teaching medical. I know a lot of great instructors.
I got to pause you real quick. You said you mentioned 2 companies, and they said there's a lot of snake oil salesmen out there. You weren't referring to those companies, correct?
No, not at all. And even if I knew an outright snake oil salesman company, I would be hesitant to blast them on the internet. I think they just do that themselves. So if I mention anybody, it's usually because I've heard good things about them. But for what it's worth, like I said, just because somebody you is an infantryman and not a medic in the military does not mean that they are not an effective communicator for the source material. So I think for example, there's a group out of Southern California whose name I'm going to get wrong, so I'm not even going to try it. I think the guy that runs them was a Ranger infantryman, and he, from what I understand, runs a really good medical training program. So just be aware that there are bullshit artists out there, and there's guys that you might not assume that are actually really good source materials for education. So just do your due diligence, check out your reviews from people that have gone there, ask for recommendations. And let me, as a member of the 2A community, as a student and an instructor, pay your friends what they're worth. A homie hookup isn't asking for your buddy to give you half off his class. Pay your buddy the full price for his class. Let other people ask for a discount. You want to support your bro, and rising tide raises all ships. So if you're going to work with somebody that likes to badmouth other companies, don't work with him. You know what I mean? So that's a big one I would say for people to look out for. If you got someone that like makes a habit of trashing other companies, even if it's fully justified, you don't need to do it.
That leads into the ethics that surround gun culture. Is that if you read the Old Testament and especially the books of wisdom, there's a number of characters, not persons specifically by name, but characters that are described, maybe even almost like archetypes, like negative archetypes, and they are the fool, the mocker, the gossip, and those are three big ones, like the fool, the mocker, and the gossip.
Let's get into some theology here, baby. Let's do this.
Well, this isn't even like solid theology. This is just the books of wisdom in the Old Testament that warn people against: do not sit at the seat of mockers. Do not sit the seat of fools, kind of thing. It's these are these little bits of advice. I got my good old non-Catholic Bible next to me. Sorry, I don't read Maccabees.
Just kidding, everybody.
Say what?
Christianity light. Just kidding, everybody.
It's called Diet Christianity. Okay.
Diet Christianity. Robin Williams, miss you, Robin.
Yeah, well,
Catholic light is what he called like Presbyterians,
Presbyterians. Yeah, I found out a funny thing. I kind of got to understand it a little bit better. But as you travel around the United States as well, different parts of the country view different names differently. For example, Southern Baptist in Minnesota is generally seen as Reformed. Reformed Baptist in Arizona is generally seen as like
denominational.
No, is a little bit like Jean Skirt, like a little fundamentalist. And then fundamentalist in the deep South is something different than fundamentalist in like Idaho.
Yeah.
And so
I grew up, when I hear about Baptist fundamentalists, I think about the guys in the tents, and that's not to be belittling to anybody's.
Are you talking about are you talking about like the tent preacher?
Not exactly the serpent folks, but like where I grew up, every once in a while you'd have the traveling folks come through. They'd pitch a tent on the corner and then get a handful of folks come by. And me being, I grew up in a very, very, very small community where, me growing up Catholic, there was one Baptist church in our town who fucking hated us, and they were mean about it. And it is what it is.
Well, I remember being younger and hearing like sort of this feud between Protestants and Catholics, and it's like, and I knew a guy who would have been described as like a fundamentalist who was big mad against the Catholics, and it's like, and spoiler alert, the guy didn't turn out to be an upstanding citizen either. But this is
having the theological discussions between like different denominations. I encourage it because I mean, as a Catholic, I actually spent a long time away from the church, attending Mars Hill Church with Mark Driscoll for a long time, and I learned a lot about theology there. And people can talk about Mark later, but I learned a ton about theology. I learned a ton by going to New Life Church in Bakersfield, California, with the Ranger family. Phenomenal. I learned so much, which honestly for me, and this is just my journey, it made me fall more in love with my Catholicism because it kind of made all of this 20,000 foot elevation come in a little bit more focused. But, it's funny when people criticize the Catholic Church, a lot of us Catholics we kind of agree with some of those criticisms, especially when it comes to the pedophilia thing. Trust me, nobody wants to find those bastards more than we do,
Yeah. I've seen that, I've seen that come out quite a bit, where
it's intellectually dishonest. You don't have an argument when that's the only thing you can talk about is like evil priests. Like, cool, man, we all know.
So there's a couple of problems there. One of them is there's a couple of problems with how it's presented, and I know that we're probably more or less arguing in agreement on this one, but one of them is the participation of pedophilic homosexuality is not codified into the Catholic faith, right?
No, of course not.
Of course not, right? So what you're doing is you're criticizing somebody for not following what they believe, but you're using that but it's being used as a sort of a breaching tool to attack the structure as a whole. And then the second part about it, which is I think more interesting, is that you have is that not only is it intellectually dishonest, but it's statistically dishonest. The existence of a pedophilic character within the church is an atrocity before the church.
Sure.
But it is also an atrocity outside of the church, and then very often, so then the church is condemned for being, or the Catholic Church is condemned for being pedophilic by people who openly support pedophilia in schools.
Well, and even if you were to break it down in a secular and break down the math, statistically speaking, a married man with children is more likely to be a sex offender than a celibate man. Now, I understand the argument that the church in Rome has a problem with probably a small group of men that are good at hiding one another and looking out for one another. And I think Joe Rogan recently brought it up on a recent podcast where someone brought up, I never considered this, that the big problem with the Catholic Church started during the plague, where you lost most of your good literate men, and they had such a void they had to fill with dropping the standards of what it would take to become a priest, that it was just the beginning of allowing the enemy into the church, basically.
Yeah. No, I saw that clip, and it makes a really good point in a weakness in having a centralized system. So one of the key differences that I see between Catholicism and Protestantism is on the one hand there are some theological disagreements, like are the sacraments transmutated, or is it more symbolic? Is baptism efficacious? Are like these kind of things, right? Which dig into the like very specific questions of theology. Things that we are supposed to agree on are things like the Nicene Creed. I believe in God the Father.
The true presence in the Eucharist. As Catholics, we believe in the true presence. Well, most Catholics believe in the true presence.
And that would be, for those who are listening who are not Catholic, what is the Eucharist?
The Eucharist is the body and blood of Jesus Christ. And
yes.
Yeah.
So that is the Eucharist being a communion.
For Catholics, it's much more than, and this is not to me saying that we're better than anybody, but for us, we take the Eucharist and communion extraordinarily serious. And in fact, it's the apex most important part of Mass, right? Mass isn't just, hey, the pastor is going to talk about how to get through the hard times today, like a lot of the non-denominational folks do. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but when you
I'm outright against the idea that preaching is just telling people not to beat their wife.
Yeah, for sure. Right. With Catholics, Mass is the celebration of the life and sacrifice of Christ, and so it culminates in the sacrifice of the Eucharist. There's so much that people that don't know about Catholicism fail to appreciate the symbolism, like the way they hold up the Eucharist and they present it. It's all part of the ceremony to represent, what happened on the hill in Jerusalem. And so for us with Catholics, we believe that look, we're not dumb that if I take the Eucharist out of the plastic wrapper that it comes to in Mass, because I used to be an altar server, it comes in a plastic wrapper. If I take a microscope, I know it isn't human cells. But we believe in that transubstantiation, where once the priest bless the Eucharist in the host, it becomes the life and blood of Christ. It becomes the body and blood of him. And some Catholics, it's interesting to see, especially with Catholics on Twitter, and Catholicism in general, you've got a lot of people rejecting some of the stuff coming out of Rome right now, especially coming out of Pope Francis's stuff, which is a whole other argument later. But I, as a person that's kind of become Catholic again, and become in communion with the church, where I don't feel I should touch the Eucharist with my hand when I receive it. I like to take it on the tongue, because I grew up just having so much reverence for what it was when we were in church. Like the idea of dropping it on the ground and blowing it off and throwing it back is just, oh, like it's so, it means so much more to me. It's difficult to explain.
I think that's also a calling for many who are looking for a deeper connection. And I've heard of people leaving sort of the evangelical light, the true like diet Christianity version of the evangelical church, and leaving it for something much more Orthodox or Catholic in this sense, where
Orthodox, a big resurgence. I've got a friend. I apologize to cut you off. I'll be really brief. A good friend of mine out of Prescott, a Christian that was in my platoon the whole time, a plane coder for Delta Company. He was one of the guys that was dragging us every Sunday morning to Mars Hill in Seattle. Come on, guys, hungover or not, we're going to church, right? And we used to. First platoon Delta Company 275 had a lot of Christians in it, actually.
It's really good to hear. Yeah.
Yeah, it was kind of bizarre. We were a weird little island in a heathen factory, but
I
right.
know John Lovell was recently on the Sean Ryan show, and John Lovell was a 275 guy, and he mentioned a segment of that. And then I had a similar experience when I was in Ranger Battalion, where at least my corner when I got there was not in that camp. They can say whatever they want, but there was a very strong, like, there are certainly individuals who don't fit the pattern, but there was like my team leader was an avowed anti-religious person.
We
And it
had
was,
half the platoon in Bible study.
yeah.
Easily.
And if you, and I had a team leader who literally condemned me for going to Bible studies. Like, you can't do this.
We have a
just
famous first sergeant who was openly hateful towards Christians, and he was the regimental sergeant major, and everyone can do the math on that. He's a fucking phenomenal guy, and he's got very personal reasons why he is got his problems with God. I understand it, but yeah, with my friend in Prescott, he was one of those guys that was just always bomb-proof, faith, always had it, never shook.
Yep.
Very Protestant guy. And then me and him started talking over the summer, and he is going through the catechumen process to become an Orthodox guy. And I think it's the coolest thing ever. I think it's just the coolest. We have different theological viewpoints now, but like you said, there is a resurgence for the old. And and for me, my Catholicism really started to get pushed supernaturally before we went to Ukraine. Me and a buddy from that mission, we went to Mass at Ash Wednesday at St. John the Baptist Cathedral in Lublin, Poland on a whim. It was the most beautiful church I've ever seen in my entire life. I couldn't believe it. I was standing in there, and we got these rosaries, which got me out of the Carpathian Mountain situation. And it's something, look, and nothing against non-denominationals, but I just like my church to be a little bit older than the strip mall that it's in, right?
That's a really good line. It's a good one. It is. I would
revolve around the personality of the pastor. Like, pastor has a scandal, he can go. The church survives. The church is more important than the pastor.
Yeah. No, I too long for the day where the attitude of the church is to build a building that's going to long outlast them. One of the churches that we visited in Ukraine was a Greek Orthodox church, and I think it was Orthodox, whatever. I know it was Orthodox, but like then I started realizing there were so many variations of Orthodox.
Yeah, Greek.
But it was a church, and it's like you could see that the village built that church to last 10 generations. And like you said, it's like how many churches have I gone to that were stood up in strip malls, or the building was constructed in such a way to be demolished in 10 years, 20 years, or whatever. It's like, I miss that hewn stone, that call to the old.
It's a sacrifice. People get pissed off that the big old churches have all these gilded ceilings and paintings, and they're all mad about the money that the church has. Well, would you rather the money belong to a collective societal good like a church and a cathedral and a central like scaffolding for a society? Or would you rather the church is being paid for the new Maserati for Joel Osteen, who's an asshole? You know, and so have you ever read Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis?
It's sitting on the shelf right here.
If you haven't read it, folks, you got to listen to it or read it. And I'm going to kind of maybe mess up his analogy here, but the best analogy I've ever heard with the path to find home, which is Christ, is the world is a giant storm, right? And no matter what, you got to get out of the storm and get into this building. And in this building, it's a long hallway, and many of the rooms are in this hallway with some of the doors open, some of the doors are closed. There are people standing in the hallway. There are people that go into rooms and leave rooms, and they go to other rooms and they go to other rooms. And some people go into one room and they never leave. And some people never leave the hallway, but they're out of the storm. And the most important thing for all of us is that Christ is that building. And regardless of what room you find yourself into one day, obviously there are some rooms that are better than others. The point of the matter is that you need to just get to Christ no matter what. And if that starts with you getting baptized in a fucking igloo pool in the backyard, during a church barbecue, then so be it, right? Like the idea is that you need to surrender yourself to something that at some point you go, I might be the smartest Neil deGrasse Tyson dude on the face of the earth that can tell you what atoms are doing, which he can't. But at some point you don't have all the answers, right? And that's what makes me love the Catholic Church so much, is that it's so mysterious to me still, and so old and pretty. And yeah, there's changes that need to be done to it, but if I leave the church, I can't change it.
Yeah, I think that one of the fundamental arguments that goes between Protestantism and Catholicism is, and there are many.
Yeah, and
one
just
of the
some of them.
I grew up in the Protestant world, and so we heard about Luther and the Reformation, and how during the Reformation the Bible was brought back to the people. It was taken out of the control of those who only spoke Latin, and it was translated into the language of the people who were there. And there's this whole and that was like
a bunch of books.
Yeah, I mean, this is like the child's version. And I think one of the funniest things that I found out in history is that one of the first two things that saw mass printing with the printing press was the Bible and Lude and Lucidius papers.
Yeah,
it was just like it wasn't nudie mags, but it was like very aggressive, like almost like not even
ye old 50 Shades of Grey.
no, it was like almost like memes. It was like just like slanderous remarks printed on a paper and glued to somebody's door, like you're an asshole, and the Pope is a bad man, and like you get all these goofy things. But I digress. But so I grew up as a Protestant who was raised on this idea that Luther and the Reformation brought a challenge to, which is funny because this podcast will probably be going live on Halloween, which is also the day that Luther nailed the 95 Theses onto the door.
Yeah, demon. That's getting so Catholic Halloween, everybody.
I'm gonna challenge your Catholicism with the publishing date of this. I'm kidding.
You're not.
But so we were told this, and I'm not saying that the story is counter historical, but one of the arguments that was made was, and this, I think this is a really well done argument, is that the Reformation intended to raise the population up to the level of the priesthood. And the Catholic argument is that all you did was drag everything down into the dumps. And so
be decent arguments.
Well, I mean, they're both decent arguments, but I think it's such a refreshing conversation to hear. I listened to a Catholic man, theologian, educated, criticizing the value of the Reformation, saying that although there were theological components participatory in its criticism, what you essentially did was you opened up the church to be challenged by anybody at any given time, no matter their level of reading or ability or their their intellectual integrity. So any fool with a bone to pick could now challenge the legitimacy of thousands of years of history just because he didn't like you. And I was like,
just that, but also like royalty and households, entire dynasties built upon the amalgamation of church and state, right? Like, the Habsburg monarchies and everybody else that was propped up by the church. And And look, I mean, like, as any good Catholic will tell you, yeah, we've got plenty of criticisms that are worth mentioning to us. And I think the second everybody sits there and goes, well, because you guys did this in the past, then everything that you've ever done is moot. Like, that's ridiculous. Like, there are so many good Lutherans out there. There's so many good Presbyterians and Methodists, and so many good, dare I say, Mormons and Jehovah Witnesses out there. They're good people, you know. Like, we can obviously split hairs about theology, but as you know, the road to hell is absolutely paved with good intentions, 100%. You know, there's good people that are going to go to hell, 100%. Good people go to hell every day.
Mm-hmm.
I think if we can just, we need to be careful who's listening to our arguments, in the sense of, if people that are on the fence about faith, they get scared off by people arguing over the color that the priest should be wearing during ordinary time, or how many candles should be put out, right? It's that back to the get them out of the storm thing. Let's be just better examples of what it is to be a Christian to begin with, and figure out whose denomination is dominant later.
Yeah, well, I think you're describing one solid side of the coin, and that is probably the Catholic side of arguing over the color of the robes and the candles and stuff. On the evangelical, or on the Protestant side, is your faith costs you nothing because you're indistinguishable from whatever the current thing is. And what there's that line that keeps coming up, and it's in Matthew, and Jesus is talking to he's preaching again, and he says, if any one of you misleads one of these ones, it would be better that a millstone was tied around your neck and you were thrown into the sea. Which isn't a isn't a light thing to come from the literal creator of the universe.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's the beginning of John talks about, the book of John, the testimony of John talks about how Jesus was there at the foundations of the earth.
Yeah, the light.
You know, the way, the truth, the way, or in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God.
Mm-hmm.
And it's referring about the Logos being Christ. And then for that being Christ, being fully man and fully God, coming down to earth and saying at one point in time, in an imperative sense, which is by no means mysterious because it was written in the Greek, and the Greek is very clear when it's making an imperative. It says, you know, if any of you misleads one of these little ones, it would be better that a millstone was thrown around your neck, or tied around your neck, and you're thrown into the sea. And so I think for many years we've seen, you know, like, I guess, even for those who are interested in Christianity, as a Christian, I recognize that only God can call you to this place, but it doesn't mean you can't ask for it. And then, and you know, in like the shittiest marketingist verb, people who are not interested in knowing about it, we're never there going to be. We're never there to begin with. So, well, let's wrap it up. Do you have any? I know we need to, because normally these shows are about 2 hours long, and we're 3 hours in, so it's really time to hit the pause button. But
yeah, the diagnosis running through me like it's pretty good too. No, I really appreciate you having me on. I've been, you know, for those that haven't been watching for us as long as I have, it's been awesome to watch this grow, you know. And the fact that I'm able to be on this show with some of the other guests that you've had on here, I'm humbled at it. You know, I think if everybody gets just I think we're on the right track as a community, to be honest with you. Again, I'm not optimist. I think we're on the right track as a community. I think even the things that aren't necessarily wins for us, like nobody wins with an ARA kind of, you know, dissolving, right? Like, I think, but at the end of the day, there's going to be good lessons learned from that. There's going to be good lessons learned from, you know, the stuff, believe it or not, that's coming out of the Hamas stuff, back to the original conversations about the terrorism. During this conversation, there was a mass shooting in Maine. I just got and 20 people are now dead in Maine.
I did receive a notification of that, but I was recording it.
But, you know, so just for everybody to know that we are prepared, or to get prepared, to help others that are not prepared, to not be a gatekeeper, to kind of bring up a topic you talked about a long time ago. You know, and you know, we're not we're not going to be a good society if we are the only ones that's the strong one on our block. So shore up your defenses by the power paradox. Give away power. Teach your neighbors how to protect themselves. Teach your family how to do the basic first aid CPR. Teach your wife. Get some classes, guys. Go to the medical classes just as much as you're enthusiastic to go do drill bills and all day. You need to be doing those medical classes. And looking forward to maybe getting on another podcast in the future. Keep talking about this stuff. And if you guys want to follow me on Instagram, I'm Revere275 on X or Twitter. I'm Ralph the Airborne Ranger. You don't want to follow me there. But yeah, man, that's basically all I got.
Tim, it's always an encouragement to talk to you. This will be one of those. It's sort of like an if you know, you know, but no one's going to know. But thank you for the support and the encouragement that you've been giving me over the last couple months and weeks.
Of course, man.
You've really you have been that person at that time, not knowing it, where it was like, man, I need some. I am not an impervious structure. So, and you said it, and it's like, oh. So thank you for that, for being an encouragement to me, even in the times you were not aware of what was going on, both in my circumstances as a human being and in my heart. And so thank you very much. You're a good friend, and I look forward to our next conversation. And now that I'm back down in the Southwest, we're not so terribly far from each other.
We'll see you in December.
Let's get together soon, and let's go have a good time about it. For those who are still listening to the Redacted Culture Cast, this is a production that is supported by you. So far, we have been pushing off the sponsorship question, and we've been growing steadily. We're well off into our numbers game, but what has been the encouragement is that those of you who listen to the show are the ones who keep the show running. So if you want to support us, you can head over to redactedculture.locals.com. That is redactedculture.locals.com. And if you want to support us there, that's the membership Patreon-like place. And that is really the only place that I really talk about gear. It's really for supporters, because there's a lot of guys who talk about it, but if you really want to have a nuts to bolts, a heavy duty gear conversation, that's the place to do it. I've got some thermal experimentation that's going on lately with weapon mounted thermals and standalones, and how to integrate it into a kit and be able to develop a skill set with that. That's what's going on over there. If you want to talk gear, that's the place to do it. But really, that's where you can support us, or you can head over to redactedllc.com and jump on the store, and you'll see what we got going on. There are periodic pre-orders for shirts. We would like to be able to stock them permanently, but at this time, we are not yet quite there. We are approaching it rapidly, though. But we've got some other rare items, including the Surprise Friend Teleportation Hood, which is made to order. And if you want to jump on, we'll talk to you soon. But other than that, Tim, I'm going to close this off, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you very much. Thanks much, man, and go forth and conquer.